Greetings and salutations, everybody. How are we doing on this fun August evening? Okay, cool. Already got some people in. Hey, Pete, Melinda, Garrick, thanks for dropping, guys. See, we got some comments already. Uh, yeah, John Ford, the pilgrim that made John Wayne arguably the face of Hollywood. Yeah. Of course, it wasn't Wayne at first, but Garrick shares a Ford's birthday. Yeah, just 94 years off. Yeah. That's pretty cool though. It's always cool to have a celebrity have the same birthday as you. I think I have somebody, but I have to double check. I don't think certainly no one is impressive. I don't think it's usually people having great famous people you admire have like the birth date that's like the day before, the day after yours, but not the exact one. So that's pretty cool. Hi Ronald, thanks for dropping in. 4K's in the house. Hey man. Yeah, I did. Lost a bit of hair, Yeah, it's gotten too hot for long hair, that's for sure. Yeah, so just finally couldn't take it anymore. So yeah, I guess that's the easiest first thing to notice on a new stream starting up. So, but yeah, I got a lot to talk about this evening. I had took me an extra minute to. I always try to pull every title I have in different formats and stuff to talk about a particular topic, and then I had to keep scratching my head. I'm like, wait, no, I've got another 4 disc somewhere, and I don't want to leave anything out. But of course, some of these are well, one in particular is a behemoth, so you're gonna have to bear with me because it's so hard to move around. But yeah, I think I've got most everything. Um, let's see. Yeah, long hair in the summer and especially in this heat wave. Yeah, especially. Um, oh wow, Buster Keaton died on your birthday too. Man, that is wow. Yeah, yeah. It's like it's cool in one way, and then always makes you kind of sad in another way. It's like it's my birthday, and it's the same day so and so died. Oh crap. So, Dex in the house. Hey man. Uh, not too versed in Ford. Well, that's fine. There's always more time to dig deeper into Ford. Even I still to this day there's Ford titles I haven't seen, and then of course, unfortunately, most of his silent output is lost. So whereas Hitchcock, you can study a number of the silent films because at least a good number of them survive. With Ford, there's so many more in terms of volume, and then that he did, and then most of them are unfortunately gone. But there's always new stuff to find because I think even like Hitchcock, like Capra, like any of the greats, even their lesser regarded pictures, there's still great stuff in there. So and oh, cool! But you saw Battle of Midway. Oh yeah, that's a fantastic piece of work, especially when you realize it's basically Ford and a camera crew in the literal middle of the Battle of Midway. So. Um, Oh yeah, and 4K's got the Stagecoach Laserdisc. We'll look at that in a second when I go through the Ford Laserdisc. It's a great cover, very simple and original poster artwork, but a really nice, better than average job from Warner. Oh yeah, Sega's in the house. Hey man, uh, asking about favorite Peter Fonda title. Yeah, that was. That, I always felt like Peter Fonda was one of those actors. You just were happy every time you saw him pop up in something, but I never really felt like he got the credit he deserved. I think he was a much better actor than and had such a great presence. So it was very sad to see that this week, but yeah, I mean, Easy Rider is so iconic; it's hard to get away from, and it broke a lot of different barriers. And so that's probably that's going to be the one, and that's going to be what he's remembered for. Of course, there are the films before that, especially the biker films that he made with AIP and Roger Corman, like The Wild Angels, which are pretty iconic for the '60s. And then I gotta say, I always think of him in the really dated and not so good sequel to Westworld, Future World, where it's he and I believe it's Blythe Danner as the other reporter. It's two reporters go to the new version of Westworld, and it's very very hokey. It's very very 70s. It's not really a good film at all, but it's got this great moment at the very end where they do one of the they do a freeze frame for the end credits, but it's literally just Peter Fonda with sort of a more, he's still got the sideburns, but it's very 70s hair, and he just turns around and basically gives the middle finger to the man, and it freeze frames it. So I always love that because it cracks me up so bad. But yeah, it's got to be Easy Rider. But yeah, that was just that was sad to hear, and it kind of ties into what we're talking about tonight because most people associate John Wayne mostly with John Ford, but before he primarily worked with Wayne, if you had to say an actor was Ford's muse, it was Henry Fonda through the 1930s and 40s until they basically had a falling out on Mr. Roberts, and then Ford went to eventually starting to use John Wayne more, so you can see there's sort of like a gradual switch over. But it's always interesting to see when a director has really good working relationships with a specific actor over multiple periods. Just as Hitchcock is most famous for doing the four films with Jimmy Stewart and the four films with Cary Grant, and all of them were totally different from one another. So, um, yeah. Oh, Metro's in the house. Hey, man. Oh, thanks. Yeah. Yeah, we were all talking about before. It's hard to have be rocking the long hair in the heat wave. So, oh, Melinda's into Dirty Mary, Crazy Larry. I've heard of that. I don't know if I've seen it, but that rings a bell. Um, and then he was in Metro's talking about he was in Thomas the Magic Railroad. Yeah. Yeah, it really is hard to believe he's gone. It's hard to even think that he was in his 70s. It's so strange. He just always had this energy about him that you just didn't really picture him as being older. And of course, talking about Easy Rider, you didn't really, at least I never pictured Dennis Hopper as really being that old. But you got to think about it. He was in Rebel Without a Cause, which is 1955, and Easy Rider is 1969, and Apocalypse Now is 1979. So a lot of these guys are a lot older than we realize. But yeah, at least Peter Fonda was able to kind of keep a career going in more of what would be considered back in the old days the character actor route. But yeah, it's and then Escape from LA. Yeah. Oh gosh, I need to rewatch that. I only saw it once, and it was years and years and years ago. And I'd like to rewatch it, even though I know the effects are really terrible. I'd like to get the Laserdisc, but that's one of those that usually goes for a bit, and it should be a common Warner disc, but because it's Escape from LA, and I'm like, so I might just get the DVD or something one day. But and again, I know it's just a remake of Escape from New York in the '90s, and they went to the West Coast. But yeah, he was pretty fun in that. Uh, yeah, hopefully I can pick it up on Laserdisc at some point. It's like an instruction fit of what is cool. Yeah, yeah, I guess you could say that. Yeah, the distilled badassery of Kurt Russell and Peter Fonda, I guess. Um, so let's see. Pickups this week, not really a whole lot. It's really more on the book side. I had a minute to go through the local bookstore. I did find, because I can't go anywhere that has movies and not find at least one thing that I needed. This is a title I've wanted to get for a long while. It's a film I really really love, but when Columbia packaged all of the old Columbia B pictures from the 30s that they did when they did a deal with Boris Karloff. So right after Karloff did his famous run at Universal, post Frankenstein, post Mummy, and everything like that, he got a really good deal over at Columbia and did a string of B horror films. And Sony packaged four of them. There's actually six of them that he did at Columbia in a nice little box set that went out of print. And since then, Mill Creek has reissued all of these, but they cram them onto multiple features on the single disc, so you lose in the bit rate. But for some reason, two of the films they just put out as singles, and you have to track them down on eBay and stuff. So I've always meant to pick them up because the other one is The Devil Commands, which is a pretty good. It's a little bit clunky. It's very noir-esque. If I remember correctly, it was directed by Robert C. Odmack, so it's very well put together. But this one may be my favorite, and it's The Man with Nine Lives. So they did this pretty cool, trying to get the get the glare off of it. But they did this really nice, it's very modern cover art, but it actually looks pretty cool. And they gave it a sort of uh, sort of an age tint to it, and Karloff looks suitably menacing. But the plot gag of this is pretty cool because it's basically talking about cryogenics in the 1930s. So even though it's a little hokey the way they go about it, basically having a literal gurney full of ice, to freeze a person. The basic gag is that Karloff is a scientist who develops the world's first cryogenics process and accidentally gets frozen in his own lab trying to save someone under the cover, with this radical new treatment. And then people find him, and then they accidentally get locked in this lab. So it goes for like another 10 years, and then they get out, and everybody thinks they're dead. And, this affects some people not so well, shall we say. But for a little, because I think this is, yeah, it's barely over an hour, it's 73 minutes. All of these Columbia films with Karloff are really, really good. The most famous and probably the best one is the first one called The Black Room, which has Karloff playing a pair of twins, and he plays each one. And of course, one is essentially a homicidal maniac. And then the other is a very effeminate, very kindly gentleman who has a lame arm. So he has to go around like this. And then it's really cool to see Karloff play the evil brother, having to pretend to be the good brother. So it's one of those where you see a great actor essentially get to play like three different roles in the same picture. But all of them are barely over an hour, and they're all really cool. But you can get these Mill Creek sets that have all of them crammed on there. But I always try to get the original Sony disc. But yeah, so this is one of the two. The other being the Devil Command, you have to get separately. But this is a great, short little spooky movie you can throw on for a Halloween marathon. But it's one of the really great little gems that Karloff did, and I'd recommend all of these Columbia films that he did. They're all really good. So that's just one I've been meaning to track down for some time. Uh, yeah, yeah. Pickups are always interesting, and it's stuff you never really meant to find sometimes. But well, I mean, you meant to find it, but it's just a surprise. So the rest are all books, and all of these are pretty cheap actually. So this is one I'd heard of, never read it, but these are not super common. But they published a couple of Zorro novels post the success of the 1998 Mask of Zorro. They also did a time novelization of that, but whoever I forget the name, but the estate that controls the rights to Zorro, they authorized like I think it's only like three or four Zorro novels or brand new stories from the past 15, 20 years, but this is one of them, Zorro and the Dragon Raiders. So I just saw the cover and I knew it was one of these. So this was a immediate. Got to check it out. It's got a little sticker residue on it, but it was it's like 50 cents. So I know that these kind of have mixed reviews, but the since I'm getting deeper into Zorro, I figured I'd give it a shot and see what it's like. And then just when I think I'm done with my Bond collection for the time, I find something else because I can't stop. This is I believe this is from the early 70s. It's a series of reissues of the original Fleming novels that was done by Bantam Books here in the US. But there's only a couple in this series, and all of them have custom artwork done. I believe these are all done by Frank McCarthy, and they all are these really stunning individual pieces crafted for each novel. So it's real. I really just picked this up for the art, and it's in pretty good shape for the age. But this is the 70s reprint of Goldfinger, and as you can see, it's got this really gorgeous artwork. I don't know if this is going to focus any better. Let's see, but as you can see, they were not afraid to print a little bit of nudity on paperbacks in the 70s. So that's pretty cool. But just fantastic detail, and these are really uncommon. I think there's only three or four of these. I have the one for From Russia with Love, but anytime I can find some of these variants, I try to pick them up if they're cheap. There's a little wear on the cover, but the rest of it is just totally mint. So it was literally a buck. So that was pretty cool. The next is a book I've wanted to read because I love the film, but It was originally published as The Ghost, but this has the film title of The Ghost Writer. So this is the Robert Harris novel. So as you can see, it's just a typical, pretty thick thriller that you see people reading in an airport and stuff. But I've just always meant to read the book because I really love the movie Polanski made, and of course, it's a tie-in reprint with the film art, which I love those. So that was a must. Next up is two titles to add to my ever-growing Hardy Boys shelf because collecting Hardy Boys is like a lifetime goal because there's just so many versions, variants, and extra series. This is part of what's commonly known as the Digest series. These were all published by Minstrel Books starting in 1979, and they pick up with book number 59. So they pick up right after the original canon series of 58 books ends, and it's supposed to be viewed as a continuation. And they published all of these up until about, I think the last one was in the year 2005. But these are getting harder to find, and since they go from book 59 to like 200 some odd. There's a lot of them. So this is book 10, book 110, The Secret of Sigma 7. Just one I was missing. It's got a little bit of corner tear, but it was dirt cheap. And it's also hard to find these without a lot of warping and in good shape. And of course, cheap children's paperbacks from the early to mid 80s are not going to be printed on the best paper. So if I can find these in decent shape, I'm happy. And this is another one. It's one of the later series. I think this is from about 2007 or so. It's when they tried to modernize it, and they're all told in first person. So I'm really not a fan of these. But since they stopped this series and now they're dirt cheap, I figured I'd pick some of them up because they're probably not going to reprint them. So this is book 16 of the Undercover Brothers series, entitled Bayport Buccaneers. So, like I said, these are really different, and they're really too modernized for me. It doesn't really feel like a Hardy Boy story, but since I'm already a completionist, I guess I must suffer and collect even the modern runs. And then on the same shelf, they had this one of also from the Digest series of Nancy Drew, because Nancy Drew always ran concurrent with Hardy Boys in terms of they seem to always do a identical series. Um, these also are not very common. A lot of people think that some of these later Nancy books are better written than some of the later Hardy Boys books. So I figured I'd start reading some if I ever find any. So this is one. This is book 98 of the Nancy Drew Digest series. And again, just like the Hardy Boys, not getting well, they're not rare, but they're getting harder and harder to find. So also published by Minstrel, same type and everything. So of course, if you were a kid growing up at this time point, you would probably remember these style of books. And then one film book, because I don't have enough film books. This is one I've actually read. It's pretty good. I read it from the library, but it was super cheap and in the biography section. This is the really good biography on the famous producer Sam Spiegel, and really talks about his entire life and sort of how he was not exactly the usual typical clear cut Hollywood image of a producer. He had a very varied life, and this is a really great read. It's got some really great blurbs from some really great people, some of whom are no longer with us. But you know, when you have such a character like this, this is like the only good book on Spiegel, and again, very highly recommended. And anytime I can add a good book that I've enjoyed film wise to my already overflowing shelf, then I will. So uh, makes up for all of the usual junky books that you get from regular bookstores that just basically all say the same thing. I think film books are about the hardest type of books to find a good book for, because it can have a great review, but you could read it and it's just like saying the same old stories over and over again. So that's pretty much it for pickups for this week. Like I said, it's mostly on the book side, except for the DVD. Um, so let's see, got some stuff over here. Oh, Metro got the Mummy Special Edition Laserdisc. That's awesome. Hope you didn't have to pay too much for it. I know some people will pay top dollar for that thing. Yeah, the McCarthy art on those books is really cool. I first became aware of it on I'd seen it, but I never knew who did it, and I'd just seen like pictures of it online. And then there's a really great blog site called the Book Bond, and it's all about the literary James Bond and different editions, foreign editions, and then cover arts. And then there was an entire article they did on the Frank McCarthy U.S. paperbacks. He did so 3 or 4 of the Fleming novels like that, and then he also did the awesome cover art for the U.S. paperback of Colonel Sun, which is the version I had as a kid, and it's got great artwork. I like the artwork more than I do the book. I love things in the book, but it's not perfect. But the artwork is fantastic. So that's one of those. I wish all the reprints because I finally did a reprint of Colonel Sun because it was out of print for years. Took me a long time as a kid to track a copy down, but I just love the artwork, and I wish they kept it for the reprints, but unfortunately, they do not. I guess it's too bold and adventurous for modern bookstore shelves. Um, oh, Ronald's here. Hey, man. He says Armageddon 2040, sorry, 2419 AD by Philip Nolan was an early book for them. And oh, it's the original origin story of Buck Rogers. Oh, that sounds pretty cool. I'll have to check that out. Thanks for the recommendation. 4K is talking about the downsides of Mill Creek releases. Yeah, I mean when they started, how yeah they were doing the budget DVD thing, but they did licensing from Sony, and the first couple Blu-rays they put out, they were like straight Sony masters. They were using BD50s, and I was just amazed. Like uh, they redid Lady from Shanghai with the Sony Master. Didn't have any extras, but it was a BD50. It was better than the first Blu-ray by a long shot. And it was only it's like 798 or something list price. And I was like, and then they did those first double feature sets where they were older transfers anyway from Sony, but they were maxed out bit rates, and they were still BD50s, and each film took up a whole single layer. So I have a number of those, and they were dirt cheap, and it's like the same stuff. It's like the same transfers that Indicator and other labels had put out, and it's exactly the same. And then all of a sudden, they switched on their Blu-rays to doing, single layer only, cramming multiple features in, no lossless audio, and all that stuff. And I'm like, no, what were you doing? You were doing it so well. It was like you were the under the radar company. But yeah, their DVDs are still aimed at like the budget market, Walmart dump bins and stuff, where it's like 20 great movies from one actor. But it's not as bad as that. It's like 6 or 7. But they basically take, um, like for example, the Sony Karloff set was 4 discs, and then they took the other 2 films, so 6 discs, and it's all crammed down, I think, onto 2 discs. So I mean, those are pretty short films, but they were all like single layer titles. So you could have done it on 3 dual layer discs if you did the compression just right. But basically, they're just doing the whole budget thing. Like the company that was doing it beforehand was TGG Direct, I think it was called, and they licensed all the MGM titles. So that's why you saw like all the classic Vincent Price horror films show up in those cheapy like single disc multi feature sets at Walmart. And I'm like, ah, crap. But sometimes that's the only way you're going to get to see stuff is by these cheap repackagings. They license stuff from studios, like even sometimes some of the like rare archive only titles or titles that you only see on like TCM every once in a while. So I have a couple of those where it's just like the really bad quality, but it's just for like those 1 or 2 films that like that's the only decent way there is to get them until somebody puts them out on Blu-ray or remasters them or something. But oh, Pete's internet has been spotty. Yeah, it's been spotty for me too recently. So I'm hoping I don't have any issues, but it does what it will sometimes. Melinda had to step out and fill a cup up. Yeah. Oh man. I guess to make it through one of mine, you either need coffee or something. I'm just using my big coffee cup so I can have enough water because my throat gets so dry doing these. Do. Oh man, Pete's internet is so bad. He's commenting without even seeing my haircut. Wow. Hope it gets better for you. Although I don't know how impressive my particular mug will be with you know a bad internet. Um, yeah, I think I know there. I think there was a problem when they did the Miami Vice Blu-rays. I think there was an issue they had to do a recall on. At least I think there was. It was like a couple episodes had like a some music missing or something, but it was basically I mean, Mill Creek has been licensing shows like that. They did that, and I think the Rockford Files as well, where, the studio wasn't doing them and the masters were there, so Mill Creek licensed them and put them out in these decent sets that are well packaged. They just don't carry I don't think they carry over all the extras from the DVDs, so it's like one of those you gotta do a comparison, and is it really worth it if you have the DVDs or not? I actually would like to see both of those shows. So I've kind of looked at those and tried to see if they would ever get marked down anymore. But I may just check them out on DVD if they stay at a higher price point. Plus, of course, I'm an extras junkie, so I hate missing out on any extras. Um, Pete is a big Searchers fan with Liberty Valance a close second. Yeah, the emotional journey, especially of both of those, really is just they're just stunning. Just they feel they're both of those. They feel so huge by the time you get finished with them. It's like just such a deep emotional weight has been placed upon you. So definitely agree on that. Okay, yeah, 4K is talking about the Miami Vice Blu-rays having some sort of audio issue. Um, okay, and okay, on the first pressings, Pete clarifies. Okay. Yeah, hopefully you can get corrected copies by now. At least some studios are pretty good. Warner Brothers will usually do like one of those like a yellow UPC, or you got to look for like the little sticker somewhere on the back in the store and hope you get a corrected one, but then half the time that doesn't matter. So it'd be nice if they would just put an actual sticker somewhere that says, fixed or version 2.0 or, something, but that's going to be asking too much. Okay, Pete's talking about the journey of Ethan and the complete emotional arc of the Searchers, which is just still as heavy hitting all these years later. You see it once, you see it 10 times, you see it 20 times. It does not diminish the impact of it. Um, Oh yeah, there's a there I don't know if I've ever spotted the car. There's supposed to be a carb in the background somewhere in one of the shots of the Searchers, and I've seen a couple things, but usually when I watch it, I'm watching the old Technicolor version on Laserdisc. So of course, Laserdisc resolution, it's a lot harder to sit there and try and spot things like that, even if you're doing, frame by frame, even on a CLV disc. Of course, that means you're gonna really not be able to see anything because you're just using the trick still stepping of your player. But yeah, that's one of those things I don't like to try and look for that stuff, because if I do and I find it, then it's just gonna bug me every time. And I'll just be like, oh my god, this is such a great piece of art. Hey, that's where that car is over there. See, is that a 55 Chevy or what is that? And I don't know. I've just never been one of those people that tries to spot movie mistakes. It's just if something is so obvious and I'm just not into the movie, that's when. But so I usually just try and go with it and try to look past any flubs or stuff. But okay, it's during a river crossing in the very back. Yeah. I knew it was somewhere in like the far background. I just couldn't remember exactly where, but yeah, usually I'm watching the laser disc, so that really kind of will obscure like super fine background details. So um oh gosh, Briscoe County Junior. Yeah, I've heard about that for years, and I really want to see that. That's one of those I think I would just like to just pick it up and just blow right through it, because I know it's supposed to be just a total blast, like a mix of adventure and dark comedy and sort of quasi fourth wall breaking a little bit here and there. But that's one I really need to check out because I've heard about that for years. and I really, I don't think anybody can dislike Bruce Campbell. So, um, can't unsee all the goofs in Gladiator. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's bad enough if you're a real, like, hardcore historian and you spot all the historical inaccuracies, so then you can't enjoy anything because it's like, "That wheel was not supposed to be on a chariot at this point in the century. That means the whole sequence is wrong." So it just destroys all, credibility for you, so, um ooh, do another show on music laserdiscs. Yeah, I mean, there's so many. I don't have a whole lot of them. I have like a handful of them. I have a number of other things that got reissued on DVD and with like other features and stuff that were originally on laserdisc or tape. But I've never really gone too far into the music LD side because a lot of the stuff I'd be interested in has been reissued since, or is like a rare Japanese exclusive or stuff like that. But yeah, there's some people are diehards and collect only those, or they're music nerds who collect music laserdiscs specifically. Like at the record convention last weekend, there was one guy at a booth who had a whole bunch of it wasn't a full crate, but it was like scattered throughout his whole table. I'd say he had like maybe 15 music laser discs scattered through, and they were all like rare, hard to find Japanese imports with, really high price tags, but they were in there. And some of the other booth owners were like, "Hey, did you see that guy's table over there? Yeah, he's got some like some Queensrack laser discs and some Duran Duran laser discs and stuff." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I saw them. I just can't afford them. They're great." Um, but yeah, they're a whole niche to themselves. Um, Pete is on board with Ford all the way. Hasn't haven't seen a bad picture yet. Yeah, I don't really think he made a bad picture. Everything has something to read into. Like I said, but then again, I'm weird. I've liked every Ford picture that I've seen. I even like the ones that people say are bad. Like I saw Mary of Scotland and I liked it. I didn't think the script was that great because it was based on a stage play, but I mean the direction and the picture itself is just fantastic. The atmospherics, the emotional resonance of everything. The close-ups he gave to Katharine Hepburn and the whole ending sequence. I mean, that's the best version of the Mary of Scotland story we've ever gotten. And it totally is based on a stage play. It's not really historically accurate, but it's the best movie we've gotten. And that's been done like what, 3, 4 times since. We just had the modern version, but I'm like, why bother? Ford did it. It's like you can't do if Ford did it, it's like don't even try it. You're going to fail. Um, yeah, I think even as Deck points out, I think even in the Ben-Hur chariot race, there's like a little bit of technology that's like anachronistic for the time period. But that's one of those things where you kind of have to just have that suspension of disbelief because there's always going to be something. I don't know for sure about the silent version's chariot race, but I'm sure there's probably something there where it's not exactly accurate. But again, that's the 1920s where they have even less, technically to work with, and it was a lot harder. So, um, yeah, even Lord of the Rings can do the same thing. Yeah, I mean, it's gonna happen. Everybody's fallible. So. Uh, Oh, 4K's got the picked up the Golden Voyage of Sinbad Laserdisc. Yeah, I think that's a Pioneer Special Edition. If I remember correctly, with the PSE banner on the top, with like the gold and sort of like marbling on the top. But yeah, they all said limited availability. I don't know if they were numbered on any of those, but all the PSE discs that I have also say limited availability. But yeah, they don't really show up all that often. They're not rare, but yeah, I think they only did like limited print runs on those. Yeah, music LDs are like horror LDs. They have their own set of collectors. Absolutely. And if it's something people want, it flies away and disappears in 2 seconds. So no matter what they go for on eBay. Um, Oh man, 4K's got the indicator Blu-ray set of Sinbad. That is fantastic. I would love to have those indicator sets, but yeah, my budget is super limited. And then they look great, and I finally went region free. And then I didn't realize when they started doing they've done 3 sets of hammers. They've done the Randolph Scott Bud Bodeker one, which I really want to get. And then they did the Sinbad one and 2 Harryhausen ones, and some of those have already gone out of print, which is really disheartening. But they're a bit pricey. But I'd like to pick up some of those at least before more go out of print. I think the Harryhausen ones were the ones that went out of print, or at least one of those. But yeah, all of those were films that should have been released to disc years ago and have not. And Indicator has been really stepping up to the plate. They primarily work with the Sony library, but they are just doing fantastic maxed out bit rates, brand new extras, original artwork, fantastic Blu-rays across the board of mostly Sony titles that unfortunately the major studios are just not doing, and they're definitely not going to put in the level of fine care and detail that Indicator or one of these other specialty labels are going to do. But yeah, if you are region free and you're interested in anything Indicator puts out, they're just like Arrow. I don't really think Indicator's doing as many 2K and 4K restorations out of pocket like Arrow does. I think they're more using Studio Masters, but they're one of the best companies in the world. I have been extraordinarily impressed with both Indicator and especially Arrow. Anything they do is just like wow. So. Um, Yeah, yeah, Ronald. If you are region free, Blu-ray wise, definitely check out the indicator disc for they did a box set of Sinbad titles, and it's fantastic. So um yeah, Sega, I'm talking yeah, price wise. Yeah, they are music LDs can just it's like I think this is on DVD in like a set for $5. Why is this laser just $45? And then a lot of them, even some of the Japanese ones, they're analog sound only, and I'm like, man, I wish this had digital sound. That would at least make it a little bit more easy to live with the high price tag. So if I ever come across any, I give them a shot. I have a couple Doors ones, and I have one or two of the REM ones, but of course, all of those were reissued on DVD at least once or twice. So, favorite of the Cavalry trilogy. Oh, that is hard. Hmm, Probably Fort Apache, maybe. If I had to pick between the three, I mean, I like all three, but of course, She Wore a Yellow Ribbon is great. Um, but yeah, it's probably Fort Apache. If I had to pick like one, I love the darkness of the Henry Fonda character. I like how John Wayne's character is like really different from what he would normally play, even at that time. And I love the black and white photography, and I just love that it's a darker story. So. Um, do I have the Criterion Blu-ray of Stagecoach? No, I really want to. It's one of those criterions that I'm just still kicking myself I haven't gotten yet. Um, but unfortunately, as I'm sure most of you guys are well aware, none of us are really rich, so we have to pick and choose our battles. And usually, I have to pick up all my criterions used or during the sales and stuff. And I need to focus more on picking up the Criterion Blu-rays I haven't gotten yet. I read all the reviews, of course, so I know what's on there and I know about the transfer. I know it's a lot better than the 2 disc set. It's a lot more like the Laserdisc and first DVD of Stagecoach that Warner Brothers did. The 2 disc special edition DVD they did has like really boosted contrast, but it's okay, but it's just not as good. It's not as natural looking. But that 2 disc special edition has a number of really great extras that are exclusive. So I have it in the box set. So that's why I, of course, keep that around. But yeah, I am way behind on my criterions. And I think I'm going to just try and focus more on at least picking up the classic Hollywood, like really important titles I'm missing. But yeah, I don't think any of us can really afford Criterion completion. That's That's going to be have to be left for the time being to Daisuke with his phenomenal Criterion collection, which is just like something I drool over in all of his videos he puts out. Actually, speaking of that, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the disc announcements. Let me pull this up because I don't want to forget any. But this week there were a ton of amazing disc announcements for new releases coming up. Just to talk about it briefly, Criterion's announcement. Um, I'm primarily going to talk about the classic titles because otherwise I'd probably blurb on about all the titles I want and can't afford for like 2 hours. But Criterion in their announcement, this is going to be a great year for Betty Davis fans because we're already getting Jezebel from Warner Archive, but Criterion is doing Now Voyager, which they alluded to in the home theater interview, but they're also going to redo All About Eve. So that's going to get a big special edition from Criterion, and I think it's a new scan. Yeah, it's a brand new 4K scan. So it should be advanced even from the current Blu-ray, which is pretty darn good. Which I think it was from about 2010 or so. So those were the big ones from Criterion's announcement, but there's a lot of let me see. What else was yeah, Warner Archives was also stacked. Again, great year for Betty Davis fans. Warner Archive will also be doing The Letter. Um, and they're also going to be doing My Favorite Year and a third volume of the classic Popeye the Sailor Man shorts, which those have looked stunning so far. And then most interest to me is they're actually going to do the classic noir, The Setup, which was directed by Robert Wise. Yeah. So that means they've almost, yeah, that means actually the entire noir box one, if I can slip this out. It's tricky when you run out of shelf space and then stuff gets in front of your shelf. But that means the entire noir classic collection box one seen on DVD here with these five titles. All of these will be out on Blu-ray. Four from Warner Archive, and of course, Asphalt Jungle has been done by Criterion. But the setup is the last of these that will finally debut on HD this year. So that's gonna be pretty cool. Setup is not only a great noir; it's one of the great boxing films. In that short list of great films with boxing themes. Um, and then the other one, I don't know if I said this already, but they're doing My Favorite Year, so that'll be pretty cool because that's one of the great later Peter O'Toole films, and the Laserdisc is pretty good on that too. And then also, Shout Factory is going to be doing Going My Way, so the classic Leo McCarey Oscar winner. And then let's see, what else was it? There was one more I wanted to mention. Um, let's see. Screen Factory is, of course, going to do a couple more Hammer titles because they're just cranking those out. And they're fantastic. Some of them are better than their UK ones with great new extras, but of course, we can't afford the Shout Factory prices. Um, but then the last one I wanted to mention, this is the biggest one for me, and this is probably going to be my disc of the year because it's such a surprise. Arrow announced two titles. They're going to do a really underrated noir that I saw years and years ago, I think on TCM late one night, called Pickup Alley, which is an interesting noir that few people have heard of. But the big news for me is they're doing a brand new Arrow exclusive 4K scan of the Anthony Mann masterpiece Western, The Far Country, which is the fourth of the five films he made with Jimmy Stewart in the 1950s, which were all game changers for the Western. It's going to be a stacked two-disc release with two different aspect ratios, 1.85 and 2.0, brand new 4K scan, uh, restored mono, full commentary, a full feature length documentary on Mann during his years at Universal, um, and some brand new critical interviews as well. So yeah, that's going to be fantastic. That is just a complete surprise because for me, I've been a giant man nerd my whole most of my life, and it's like He's one of the directors you can't talk about because nobody has any idea what you're talking about. But yeah, that'll be Man from Laramie was restored by Sony, and that's got two great Blu-rays out. Winchester 73 has been supposed to come out. It's rumored to be a Criterion title, but nothing's happened so far. Bend to the River, the second film, got released by Kino, but it's an old scan, and the Technicolor registration is off, so that's not really very good. And Naked Spur only has a DVD, which is kind of blurry and out of focus, which is like the print I saw. But that one really needs HD and needs a new negative scan. But yeah, that is really fantastic news. So I thought Johnny Quest was going to be my disc of the year, but I think that's probably going to be number two because I am just floored. Like that is going to be one of the few discs I will. I'm trying to wait to see because Arrow sometimes, if you get the UK disc, it can be cheaper by a significant margin. It's going to be released here in the US as well. But since I finally went region free, sometimes even if you pre-order it can be like half as expensive to buy the UK one and just get it shipped over as opposed to buying the US one when it releases on street date. So I'm just waiting to see what the price point is for that, and that's going to be a definite pre-order. So I'm thinking maybe if this sells well enough, they might try and do Bend to the River, which really could look amazing. And I'm hoping Warner Archive does Naked Spur because that one could really use some help. And it's one of the great, they're all some of the greatest westerns ever made. All right, catch up here a little bit. Yeah, as Pete points out, Indicator is a boutique label. They're based in the UK, so all their titles are Region B for the most part. They do some discs that are region free, but they've done a lot of Sony titles. So a lot of stuff Twilight Time has done here. They've reissued over in Region B territories. So Fat City, Lady from Shanghai. Uh, they've done so many Twilight Time titles, but yeah, pretty much everything they do is great. And they did that phenomenal Night of the Demon release with all the versions and just hours and hours of extras, which is just one of the best Blu-rays ever. So I love what they do, even if some of the sources they get are not the best. Like some of the versions on that Night of the Demon set, it's what Sony had already done, and it's only ever going to be so good. So, but at least they got it out there in a beautiful package with tons of loving extras and stuff. So, yeah, they're one of the best boutique labels out there. If you guys can make one half-hour laser disc, what would you put on it besides filling it with your favorite music videos? I don't know. It'd be weird to have like a home movies on Laserdisc. I mean, at least you can put in a tape of home movies if you want it, or get it converted to DVD. But to actually fire up a Laserdisc that you curated yourself, that would just be weird, because there hasn't been a new disc made since 99 2000. So it'd be like part of yourself in a in something from another time. Pete's talking about the Searchers Blu-ray. Yeah, it's a great transfer for early Blu-ray, but yeah, the color, um, that's still discussed on online forums. There's a number of Warner titles from that period, but the Searchers is the one that they talk about most of all. And to be honest, I kind of agree with them. That's why I still like the old Laserdisc, um, and then the remastered Laserdisc and first DVD with that transfer is like an in the middle. But yeah, I think detail wise it's good. It's like watching the Wild Bunch Blu-ray. It's a very early Blu-ray. It's from 2007. I think the Searchers was from 2007 as well. So the codec isn't as good, but yeah, it looks good. It's sharp. It's the best version on home video technically, but there's like some color tonalities that don't seem quite right, and I can agree with some people what they're saying. The other one is let's see. I think I've got it on the shelf here. Let's see, where did you go? Yeah, the other one being Howard Hawks Rio Bravo, which was again another early title, And just like the Searchers, this was based off of the special edition DVD master. So this one has like really saturated color, and this is the one most of all that I'm like, yeah, this does not look right. Like all the skin tones are really saturated. All the color, it seems like somebody cranked up the color knob like across the board. So I mean, it's still a great transfer, but if you look at the old snapper case DVD or the old Laserdisc, they look a lot more normal, even though they're much more contrasty. So this is actually the Blu-ray reissue. This one upped the mono track to a lossless track, so that's why I picked it up, and it's like dirt cheap. Pops up in like some of the Best Buy discount bins, but yeah, this is the one most of all that I think has color issues. So the Searchers I understand, but it's not as bad as this one. So but yeah, a lot of people will just think that people are crazy for complaining about that. But some of those guys on like the home theater forum are actually talking about the dye transfer Technicolor prints they've owned, not just seen, but some of those guys have owned dye transfer prints. So, um, but for all intents and purposes, if you go back and forth between different versions, they're all relatively similar. But again, the color is so important in the Searchers, and so impactful that you want it to be as correct as humanly possible. But yeah, that's one where I think it is a great transfer. I think it's the best one we have technically. But if I watch the Searchers, I'm usually watching the old Laserdisc. Um, yeah, Deck. I always wait for the Barnes and Noble Criterion sales, and then that's when I don't have much money to spare, and I'm like, oh crap, not again. And then I have to wait, and I'm like, well, is there like, and I usually like maybe pick up one title that I'm missing or that I need, or I try to find the ones that are because there's like some slightly different price ranges. So I try to get some of the more expensive ones or some of the ones that don't show up on eBay or use pages as much. So yeah, usually all I can afford is like one at a time when those happen. But at least we have that for Criterion, so they are affordable. Whereas Shout Factory, it's not. So as much as I'm dying to see the Universal horror sets they put out, and then they just did the Luton classic, The Leopard Man. They did Curse of the Cat People and the Body Snatcher, and they're doing the Hammer horrors, and I'm just so excited. And I read the reviews, and I'm like, I can't afford these. They're like one and a half or twice as much as a Criterion, and it's just like one movie. Like it should not be this expensive. Like we can't afford this, guys. um yeah, I think Searchers will happen for 4K at least someday, because that still is a big title for Warner's. And yeah, I agree that the DVD 50th set we'll get to in a second when I talk about Ford on DVD. It's a really nice package, so I was really happy to actually pick it up. It's a pretty nice little um, hardbound slipcase. It's really more swag. You don't really need it, but it's a really nice little item, and it's dirt cheap these days. Let's see. Oh, 4K says indicator will have a sale on Friday at noon. Oh crap. My depleted wallet is just like killing me right now. They've done a couple sales which were really really good, but again, it seems like everybody times their sales for when my funds are not at their highest. So then I just have to stare and go, oh, that would be nice. Um, but yeah, sometimes you have to load up on the sales for import labels. I've done that for Arrow a couple times because Arrow will do a couple sales on their website a year, and it makes it a lot easier to pick up UK export discs and get nice discounts and have pretty cheap shipping. And then some have free shipping if you go over a certain threshold. But you have to make sure you do the currency conversion right. So when you think you're only going to spend $30, and then you get to the checkout and you're like, oh no, it's significantly more than that. So now I have to put more titles on the want list and cull it down some more. Um, Christopher's in the house. Hey, man. Oh, you got the Indicator Sinbad and Five Tall Tales sets. Yeah, they are fantastic. I'm jealous. I would love to have both of those. Um, hopefully one day I can spring for all of the box sets they've done so far before they all go the way of the out of print dodo bird. Um, Oh, Melinda's talking about the laser disc for the Far Country is really cool. It's a double feature set with Bend of the River, and they both have good transfers. The Far Country was always shown 133. It was opened up on all the old video transfers, and that laser disc is pretty cool. It's a really good print transfer. It looks really awesome, but it was one of those where it was pretty much intended for widescreen, but, the reason why I didn't like the DVD as much was because it was, like, too tight. They didn't do a good job at, framing it, so, I'm excited to see what Arrow does. It would've been cool if they were doing a 133 version, but I know technically it's not the way it was supposed to be shown. It'll be odd to see it at 2:1, which was the universal, super wide ratio, but, I'm sure their new 185 framing will look fantastic. Yeah. Yeah, I agree, Pete. More classics need to get released in 4K and but make sure to never go full Batman 89 on us again. Yeah. Um, yeah, that's I mean, Warner Brothers seems to be stepping up. Wizard of Oz is coming in 4K, and I would hope that would extend to the big titles. So, that would mean also Gone with the Wind and things they've already done the restorations for. So hopefully North by Northwest as well. But I don't know if it's going to go much further than that, unfortunately. So it'd probably be like maybe the top 10, 15 or so. And then Wild Bunch will probably happen when this stupid remake is closer to coming out, so we can just look at a beautiful 4K transfer and then ignore the travesty of a remake of the Wild Bunch. So, but yeah, the just like with DVD, just like with Blu-ray, the problem of possible revisionism, rears its ugly head. Um, Ronald likes the second version of Rio Bravo El Dorado. Yes, absolutely. Which this is a pretty good. It's from the Paramount reissue series, so they all have this sort of grayed out cover. But yeah, the Paramount Blu-ray is pretty good. Even though all of these are from older masters, this one's pretty decent and it actually carries over all the extras, which not all Paramount discs do, which we'll talk about in a bit when we talk about Liberty Valance. But yeah, El Dorado is great, and ironically, Hawks could make the same picture 3 times and get away with it, which, the studios used to do that. You could actually look and see, uh, you know, um, the Preco classic Red Dust with Gene Harlow and Clark Gable. Well, that was remade as Torrid Zone as a Cagney vehicle, and then it was remade again as Mogambo. So that stuff happened by the studios all the time, but it was not the same director with the same lead actor 3 times. But yeah, I like things in all 3 of them really, but I just always love to bring that up because it cracks me up that they got away with it. And then in a lot of ways, it was Hawks's reaction to High Noon because he and John Wayne thought it was ridiculous that one guy taking on all the outlaws by himself was seen as a hard bad thing, and they're like, no, you should go out there and blow them away. That's what a real man would do. And I'm like, guys, you're kind of missing the point. Like, High Noon is actually it's a lot more believable, but I mean, it's not as fun. It's not intended to be fun, but yeah, that was the impetus behind making Rio Bravo in the first place. Is they were like, we think High Noon is stupid. We think, John Wayne wouldn't do that. John Wayne would have just gone up there and just blown them all away and then just gone on about his business. And I'm like, well, it wasn't a John Wayne movie. you know, it was a lot more honest and it was a lot more emotionally driven and honestly a lot more realistic. And nowadays, people really read into the fact that it was basically being written and designed to be a parable about the current ongoing situation with HUAC and the fallout of the Red Scare. So it wasn't just a Western, but, I don't think Hawks and Wayne were really reading into that. And if they did, and especially John Wayne, then they really would have hated it. So that was one of those things that just made me love High Noon even more. But yeah, Rio Bravo is definitely a total reaction to not only High Noon, but all of the psychological westerns that were coming into play in the 1950s, especially the Anthony Mann westerns, which are really the impetus and the definition of the psychological western. But let's see. Yeah, especially if I had the house and the money, yeah, asking studios for newly struck prints, yeah. Well, you definitely have to pay them, but yeah, you would definitely have to pay a pretty penny. But I mean, they strike prints for certain people, so it is. It does happen, like especially really famous directors and stuff. But they can also get prints generated for circulation and stuff. But, yeah, I mean, if you ask them for a print, they would just strike a print of the new 4K version, so I don't really think that would go well for you. You'd have to really specify and get them to do the work, but, I don't modern film printing is not what it once was, so you probably would get, something back that's you may not like very much. It's like trying to get a modern, vinyl record pressing that isn't crap, It's like there's very few places in the world that do a really good job, and you have to pay a premium price, and you open it up, and it's warped, and it's got handprints and scratches and stuff, but that's the state of, vinyl pressing in, 2019. But yeah, if only there was a way you could fit 35 mil projection setup and vault in your house. Yeah, oh, I'd be all over that. I've even been tempted to try and do 16 collecting because there's a bigger 16 mil collector's market still because it's more available, it's easier to work with, it's cheaper. Um, and there was a lot more stuff generated that because it was being sent out to army bases and libraries and film rentals and all kinds of different things. So it's a lot more available. But even that, you really have to have the space. You have to put the time in because it's a very painstaking process. So, um, but why stop at 35? Why not collect 70 too? There are guys, really rich people who have 70 millimeter projection in their house, but since that really begs for a large screen, it kind of defeats the purpose to just have, even a 15-foot screen. It's still not really big enough. But I guess if you're sitting right in front of it and you're that rich, one can dream. That's like if I'm asked what I would do if I won the lottery, that's it. It'd be like I would build the world's greatest print collection in my house. I would have a special vault built, and then everybody stares at you like, "What?" I'm like, "But you could have 70 mil with 6-track mag in your house," and then they just run away. so, um, Yeah, I mean, print collecting is amazing, and it is the most visceral. It is the most directly connected, and because you have to physically interact with it. But um, like like I said, the only feasible way to do it is to go the small route and do 8 millimeter, Super 8, or 16 millimeter collecting because there's still collector forums, there's still stuff, and it's much easier to find that stuff on eBay or Craigslist and a lot cheaper to get like an old 16 millimeter projector. But then, you got to research how to repair them, how to operate them. And, but like with anything, it's a learning process. I'd like to do that at some point. I've run some 16 millimeter. I've shot 16 millimeter and I projected some and I've worked with some projectors and stuff, but it was mainly like projecting like some old, like shorts for television or like small documentary pieces and stuff. But, it can be really amazing. Even though it's, 16 millimeter. Let's see. Yeah, we're talking millionaire type talk. Yeah. Oh yeah, and of course, if you're not doing it yourself, you need a trained projectionist. It's like, yeah, I have my projectionist on call. Let me call him. I feel like running something tonight. Yes. Are you available for 6 hours? Okay, excellent. Come to the booth. um, Might as well open your own theater at that point. Um, Oh man, Pete's on the checkout because of bad internet. Hopefully, hope you can get something better up, Pete. I know sometimes it just decides it's just not going to work for you. Um, ah, I give up 3 hours a week to do education. Ah, well, what one tries. I'm glad to know I'm being somewhat informative. So, when we say strike a print, Sega, that means literally make a brand new print of something, whether it's um, primarily today, it would be making a film print from a digital source or digital intermediate. But yeah, it's always referred to as striking a print. It's basically making a brand new 35 millimeter print, or for IMAX, it would be striking a new IMAX print. Of course, like with anything, it's getting much harder to come by people and facilities to actually, be able to do that, and people who know what they're doing. So it becomes more time consuming and much more expensive because there's less and less places to do it, and a lot of the places that do it, it's not their primary focus, so we're getting things show up and turn out that really are um, not at the quality level they should be. And like the analogy I made with vinyl records, it's the same way. If you went out to a store and you bought 10 brand new sealed records from like Barnes and Noble, because that's really the only major national chain that sells records on a large basis. If you went out and bought any 10 records off the shelf there, and you opened all of them, the majority of them are going to have warps and scratches and handprints, or will be off center, or have intergroup distortions, because they have all kinds of problems because the infrastructure that was around during the heyday of vinyl no longer exists. So that's just how it is these days. And you have to look and get things from particular plants because particular plants are a lot better than others. So with striking a film print, it's the same thing. You can get really lucky and get a beautiful print of something, and then you can get the same thing made as a new print from another facility, or even the same facility as the other one. You could get 5 prints made, and 3 of them are crap. It's just that's just how it goes. Um, but is there anything bigger than 70 mil? Well, technically, IMAX is bigger in terms of aspect ratio and frame usage, but it's still operating off of the 65 millimeter negative source. But it's also using it in a slightly different way. So that's why you get that really big 1:4:4 ratio. Whereas 70 millimeter, you're usually going to get the super Panavision ratio of 2.21 to 1. So that's why films like Lawrence of Arabia are that particular aspect ratio, and you can play around with that. You could do like Ben Hur and Khartoum, and of course Hateful Eight, and use Ultra Panavision and put the anamorphic squeeze on it to get that 2.76 ratio. Now, basically, the benefit of going to 70 millimeter was to increase your definition, increase your fine detail because it's roughly double the size. But the big difference was having the extra space to cram in that 6 track magnetic stereo sound, whereas 35 was still mono up until the late 70s with the advent of Dolby Stereo. And of course, there were some things in between, like 4 track mag for CinemaScope and things like that, but it's primarily mono. So the big stereophonic sound was the big benefit of 70 millimeter. And when digital sound came in for 35 millimeter in the early 90s, that was really what was the death knell for 70 millimeter, because that was like the big thing they had left. And uh, printing quality overall had gotten so much better by the early 90s that you didn't have as much of a difference when back in the old days they would do blow ups of 35 millimeter movies to 70 millimeter, and it would be a better picture, it would have better definition, and you got the much better sound fidelity because you got full multi-channel stereo surround, whereas the 35 version would be in comparison a bit softer and bit contrastier, and it would have mono. So that was the difference. And that's why you paid more to go to the 70 mil show. But by, like 92, 93, 94, especially by 95, what you got in your regular multiplex with Dolby Digital or DTS or SDDS, and the much improved 35 millimeter printing processes, it made the difference much more negligible. And so chains no longer were wanting to put in the big and bulky 70 mil equipment and have the big screens and put all of the time and money into it. So that's really why 70 millimeter kind of died out. Um, well, this says, don't remind me of new vinyl pressings. Yeah, you open it up, you take out the inner sleeve with the vinyl inside, carefully take out the vinyl for a first listen, and dirty as hell. Yes. Yeah, if you go on any music forum, if somebody talks about a new vinyl pressing they got, the first thing they say, after several cleans on the spin clean, it was okay. And I decided to put it on my table finally because I didn't want to subject my expensive equipment to it. Yeah, it's just United is now the biggest plant in the world in Nashville. I've done the tour there, and I mean it's huge, but they're just about the worst because it seems like there's no quality control, and there's some good plants still around, but you got to sit there and look at who did the engineering, who did the cutting of the lacquers, where it was cut, where it was pressed. There are some things where you need to get the identical version in Europe because it was pressed at a better plant. But they make this stuff difficult. On most releases, it's just you have no idea until you open it up. But yeah, I don't buy very many new vinyl pressings because it's such a crapshoot. And I don't have a $600 VPI vacuum record cleaning machine as much as I would like to. And on a lot of those, you basically have to. And then to deal with, like, I've had some with just like dish warps right out of the sleeve. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. I could get a scratched up, beat to crap um, 60s album and it plays better. So yeah, you have to do your research. It's just there's no way around it. Yes, I guess Clerks was shot on yeah, I think it was 16. It was I think it was probably Super 16 because that was the indie cheap method of shooting on lower cost stock. And Super 16 was invented. It's a little bit wider gauge. It doesn't save the space for the soundtrack, so it gives you a little bit of wider space, and that it makes it easier and a little bit more clear to blow up to 35 because most festivals would only accept 35 millimeter, and all of the official studios would insist you had to shoot 35. So the cheap method was to shoot 16 or Super 16, which was optimized for the blow up. And so your prints and all your video transfers, that's why they kind of have that soft, washed out, cheapy look. Biggest example would be Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, which that's why the Blu-ray of that doesn't look so hot because it was shot Super 16, and they used it's a lot of dark scenes and stuff, so that further enhances the grunginess of it. But yeah, that's how it was in the '90s for especially for it was mostly indie films and low budget. The other one, Leaving Las Vegas, was also shot 16, Super 16, and then blown up to 35, which is why it has that particular, very grainy, very kind of, it's not really diffused, but it has that soft but noisy look to it. That's why, because they were shot 16 and blown up. And nowadays, what people will do if they want to shoot film, a lot of times is they shoot on it's usually three perf. So it cuts down on the amount of film they're using, and it's cheaper because they're just going to transfer it to digital anyway. So you don't have the problems in doing optical blowups because you're just going straight to digital. So you don't have any conversion going on in the optical world. So I know Black Swan was done that way. I know when Spielberg did Lincoln, that was shot on three perf as well. So you're able to transfer to digital and just edit as you normally would, and it's a cost effective way of being able to shoot film and make the cost less because you're not having to worry about going through the optical blow up process and causing any softness or image reduction in quality. Ronald talking about the Lawrence of Arabia screenings in September. Yeah, that's the TCM Fathom show for September. And yeah, the 4K DCP of that is amazing. And Robert Harris himself prefers the 4K DCP over the 70 millimeter projection. So that is high praise. So if the film's restorer says that, then that's about as high as praise you can get. Yeah, I would go, but I know I've talked about before. Every Fathom show I've gone to, at least in my local area, has just been terrible. Been full of bugs and errors, and at the worst, weirdest times. It'd be like, go see Lawrence of Arabia on a Tuesday at 11:45 a.m. at this one theater 25 miles out of the way, and I'm like, eh. I know that's not a very good theater. you Um, but yeah, if you have a good location near you and it's a good time, I would definitely say it'd be a good idea, especially if they're showing the 4K DCP. But I think most Fathom shows, at least in the US, they're usually just like doing some stream of the Blu-ray version. Um, oh, Garrick talking about, yes, the Beatles 2014 mono set. That is literally the single greatest vinyl reissue ever done. It's the best reissue ever done, period. And it's insane that they stopped making them and now they're skyrocketing in value. But those all analog chain, and they used original engineering notes, and they cut from the original master tapes with the much improved fidelity of modern plating and equipment. So it's basically getting a impossibly mint copy of an original mono parlophone British first issue Beatles album, complete with a fully reproduced cover, identical in every single way. For they were selling for like $22 a pop, I think it was, and to get the equivalent of that from an original, you'd pay thousands. It was insane. And then kids could hear the Beatles for the first time properly if they got their first cheapy turntable. And it was a lot better than those terrible stereo remasters they did first. But in terms of those vinyl pressings were terrible, and so they like learned from that and made sure the monos were great. And now they've stopped making them. So you see those going for like 50 to $100 each on eBay already, or even on you know, uh, forum trades and stuff. But yeah, those were the greatest reissues ever done by anybody, any format. They're amazing. So yeah, if you guys see any of those, grab them while you can before they're gone. I cannot speak highly enough for them. I never in my life thought I would, see something of that quality. And I wish for the Abbey Road anniversary, they just announced the big, 50th anniversary box sets and the Blu-ray, and they're gonna have a new 2019 remix and stuff. And I'm like, well, forget that. Why can't we have a stereo vinyl reissue done like the 2014 monos? Like I'm waiting for the stereo vinyl of Abbey Road, Let It Be, and the White Album, the three stereo albums. I would like to have that done like the 2014 monos, all analog, perfectly pressed and everything to have as the supplement. Because every time I pull that box out, now I don't even want to pull it out because now it's just like total collector's item. And totally scarce. I'm like, I want to hear the other three, but I don't have a good stereo version of those to complete the run. But yeah, those are amazing. That's the prime example of modern vinyl done right. And they're even better than the mono CDs, which were not that great. So yeah, those are amazing. Um, be jealous, yeah. I didn't have it for the longest time. I got it on one of those on my music forum. There was a thread where everybody just tracked the price and always posted if they found some deal on it, or be like Amazon mispriced it for like a day, and everybody would order it, and like everybody's orders would get canceled, and then like maybe one person got it for some ridiculously low price. Um, I got mine though. Somebody posted that a music site in Canada actually was doing like a Black Friday sale, and it was like a site wide thing, and it actually included the mono box. So everybody tried it, and it actually worked. So I was like, well, I'm sure it'll be sold out. And I tried it, and it worked. So I was afraid of it coming all the way from Canada, but it was, those boxes are packed already in these really awesome, sturdy, padded cardboard mailer boxes that, yeah, I got mine from Canada, and I didn't pay all that much for it, and now I'm really, really glad I did get it because not only is it amazing, they stopped making them. So, but yeah, I would tell anybody get any individual mono albums you find before they're gone. And like I said, the values are already just going through the roof. Um, because the box, it was just you got the awesome box, and it has a nice hardcover book inside, and then it also included the rarity set, but I think they eventually sold that separately too. So you could piece together all of the mono reissues individually. You just wouldn't have the box or the book. But those are so good. I would say do that even. But unfortunately, they've now skyrocketed in value. But I don't know if any stores still carry any. But if you ever find any in a bin somewhere, grab it. They're amazing. So yeah. Talking about driving away to faraway theaters, yeah, they should include a box of popcorn, but yeah, that would that would be an extra $20. um, oh, P can see me now. Yeah, thanks. That's yeah, feels a lot better. I'm definitely not soaking up so much of this lovely heat we're having now in August. So, oh, Sega talking about the Pet Sounds as a good mono remaster. Yeah, I heard about that, but I will admit I've never been a big Beach Boys fan, but I've been trying to dig into more of their back catalog, and I know there's so many different reissues and stuff. But yeah, I think they finally did a good mono Pet Sounds. I really need to check that out. So I guess we should now get into the Ford talk since I've set aside so many different things. Um, Firstly, I wanted to mention two books. Well, one book and then one book that I would recommend. There's a good number of books on Ford, but a lot of them talk about the classic Ford stories or the archetypal stories or with Ford, the line and the important theme of liberty valance, this is the West. When you have to choose between printing the fact and the legend, print the legend. That really defines what's most of what's been written about Ford in a lot of ways. There's a lot less of direct reality in terms of the writing. There's a lot of the legend of Ford in a lot of the books. Um, and part of that's important, you do need part of that, but for the longest time, it was like a lot of the same stuff being rewritten over and over. Um, but the two books I would recommend would first one the first one, if I remember correctly, this is written by Dan Ford, who is the grandson of John Ford, and he started kind of working on this in the later years of Ford's life in terms of trying to get him to talk a bit about his career and his past, because Ford was very much one of those people who did not like to talk about his work or himself and could come across as just like a supreme grouch, especially when the French New Wave and all of the brand new French criticism brought in a whole new wave of film culture. And so all these young guys would show up, at his office and pepper him with all these questions, and he'd just be like, but anyway, this is a good overall book to give you a sense of Ford. This is a reprinted version, but it's entitled Pappy, which was one of Ford's primary nicknames that friends would use, but written by his grandson Dan Ford. And this is a pretty good overview of the main part of his career, and also it's always helpful when it's being composed by someone from the subject's intimate circle. So being started by his grandson during while Ford was still alive. And then I think this is a later version. So I think it went through several different versions over the years of just adding more material found later. But this is a really nice read. So I would recommend this. The other one, the best one, unfortunately, I've read it from the library a couple different times, but I've not gotten a copy yet because I want to get the hardcover one because I love flipping through it so much. I don't want to get the paperback and crack the spine. But Joseph McBride's "Searching for John Ford" is the best John Ford book. It gets past the legend stuff and really tries to give you an overall view of what Ford was like as a person and his work ethics and mentality throughout the years. Because, like anybody working for such a huge swath of time in the history of motion pictures, his mentality and his work style changed over the years. It wasn't just using different actors and stuff, but so that's the best one. Unfortunately, I don't have a copy here. I've just been wanting to get. I want to get the hardcover version because I love the artwork on it, and all of McBride's film biographies are just fantastic, and I've reread them a ton. But yeah, his Ford book may be his best one because it's the best book there is on Ford. And there's a lot of other Ford books, like the one by Scott Imond is really good as well. And then there was a recent book on the relationship between Ford and John Wayne that I read the reviews for, but I haven't read it yet. But the reviews are pretty good, so there's that as well now. So every once in a while, it's like we get through a couple new books coming out on not just classic directors, but classic Hollywood and motion pictures that are actually well written and composed and things. But yeah, I would suggest if you really want to go into, because it is a really thick book. It is a long read. But McBride's Searching for Ford is the best one. If that's maybe a little too daunting, maybe try the Scott Iman book, which is probably a third to half the size. It's still pretty long, but it's more like a career overview. If going for the full life biography is maybe a bit daunting if you're only just starting with Ford. Um, but yeah, I wanted to mention those because there are at least a good few books on Ford. There's a lot of books on westerns that talk about Ford. There's a number of books about Wayne that talk about Ford. There's a number of Ford books, but you got to sift through them to find the ones that actually say stuff besides just repeating the legend again. Printing the legend, that whole idea, just it keeps perpetuating in terms of in relationship to Ford. Um, Now, the reason why I thought it was a good idea to do this is, Ford had such a long career and affected so much, not just in the genre of the Western, but just, the structure and form of motion pictures in general. It's very rare you could talk about somebody who had a long career, who started in the silent period, worked their way up, and then directed multiple silent films, and then became a great director in the sound era, and then lasted until after, the studios were starting to collapse. I mean, very few people were able to do that and maintain themselves as relatively, a major player up until, the very end of their career. And usually Hitchcock is the only one that, people can point to who did that. But, Ford is the other giant who was able to do that. And of course Hitchcock had to start in Britain, where their film industry was not what it was in Hollywood, so it was a lot more limited. And Ford was able to start. He had a sort of way in because his older brother was a very prolific silent film actor and especially silent film director. If I remember right, I always mix this up because there are multiple Fords, but his older brother was Francis Ford. So that was why he came out to Hollywood in the first place, and started working on his brother's films. And then eventually, it's very strange and interesting to read, especially in the biography, about how eventually he wound up superseding his own brother. And then eventually, his brother was the one who would get the bit parts on John Ford's pictures. But that was sort of the way he got into the industry. And then he started very small and basically kind of over time. And of course it's very difficult to discuss this because the vast majority of his silent films are completely lost, and he made a ton of silent films. I mean, he's credited, I think, with, I know it's either 140 or over 140 features that John Ford is credited with directing, but there are so many silent films he made that are lost. But even the ones that still exist, when you go through them, you can start to see, it's maybe not there all at the beginning, but it starts to build up over time, this sort of style and methodology. And then the fact that he basically built his own stock company of actors he would reuse over and over again, that starts in the silent period. So it becomes sort of a shorthand, being able to work with these same people over and over again and always adding new people in. Um, but I don't know if there is people do not talk about Ford enough, and Ford is in danger of being, sort of lost to time when he's not only one of the greatest film directors. If I'd even go so far as to say, if you had to talk about who are the greatest artists that America has ever produced, short of Orson Welles, I mean, John Ford is right there. I mean, the importance of Ford's work is so important, not only to motion pictures, but just to art in general. That I really get have the disconcerting feeling that he's getting to the point where he's going to be forgotten about. And so many of the great directors are. I mean, if it's something that doesn't appear in the last 5 minutes of someone's social media feed, people have no real idea of stuff anymore. Or they may know some of the famous images of things, but I mean, Hitchcock is more well known, but we're going to get to this point at some point in maybe not the near future, but there's going to be a point in time where people aren't even going to know Hitchcock as a director anymore. They'll just know some of the films, or they might recognize the funny old English dude with the funny voice, who makes movies about murders. That's um, because film culture, unfortunately, is just not as well. Uh, you know, um, Propagated in 2019. You have to be somebody who actually becomes actively involved to seek this stuff out. Um, but I the more I read about Ford, the more I think about Ford. He broke so many barriers and did so many things before anybody else did. And in addition to having such a career longevity that um, I don't know if anybody else really measures up to that. I think Hitchcock is probably the closest. But Hitchcock didn't direct his first film until 1925, whereas I think Ford's first credited silent, I think I had to pull this up because with 140 plus films, it's hard to remember. um, I think his first credited directed feature is yes, his first credited feature as director was 1917. And that then he went all the way to Seven Women in 1967. So 50 years right there, of just features directed, because he had been actor and quasi writer and crew and stuff, back all the way to 1912, 1913. So it wasn't that he just started in films as a director in 1917. He had been working for years on his brother's films. So it was somebody who came out and worked his way up and found not a niche, but sort of a way of working. And primarily in the silent era, he established a style of film with Harry Carey Sr., who became a big Western star in the 20s, and most of his great silent films were directed by John Ford, and they would develop all of this stuff, and they really developed a close friendship, and that's what really got Ford more established. Unfortunately, most, if not all, of these films are of course lost, so we can only talk about reviews of the time, or mentions in books and stuff. And that's the most I've ever been able to find out about most of these. Um, so then you basically have to go all the way up to the silent film that really got him established, which was 1924's The Iron Horse, which is a really stunning silent western that really was a colossal production. Basically about the establishment of the railroad in the West, a classic theme of all westerns. So again, you could look at almost any western ever made, and it's hard to not go, well, Ford did it in this, and then Ford did it back then, and then Ford did it this, and um, so the Iron Horse is really the surviving silent, which should be, it's like the easiest starting point if you're going to go in terms of the important, touchstone films in his career. The Iron Horse is just a huge leap forward, production wise, technically speaking, and just the scale of it for a silent film at that point in time. Um, so that's really where his silent career went. And then post Iron Horse, it was, doing a bunch of different things, because he didn't just make westerns. Most people make the mistake of thinking Ford, is the definitive western maker, which he is. But he did a lot of other things, and there were multiple periods in his career where he wasn't making westerns, and so it'd be a while before you got him doing another western. But unfortunately, most people, he's so associated with Monument Valley and John Wayne and making westerns that most people don't realize he has a whole breadth of other work. So again, I don't think you could talk about Ford enough. I don't think you can talk about Ford's style enough. He developed a particular style that's of its own and doesn't really seem like anybody else. He was slightly influenced, as Hitchcock was, by the great German filmmakers and German expressionism. Whereas Hitchcock went over and actually worked at the UFA studios, in the 1930s in its heyday. So Hitchcock worked with, all of the greats of the German cinema, would see Fritz Lang at work, and that was a huge influence on his style. Ford really got that experience when Fox brought FW Murnau over, and Murnau made one of the greatest films ever made in Sunrise, and that just totally bowled Ford over and really influenced his style that was emerging. So you do have a definite influence of German expressionism, but Ford, it's really, it's not just the things people would do, and everybody talks about directors and there's the auteur theory and stuff, but I always feel that the rest of the crew gets slighted because it's not one person doing it all by themselves. But the strength of the auteur theory is that if you watch somebody's breadth of work, or you see a number of their pictures in a relative span, the idea is that an auteur's work can show touchstones and similarities across different films, whether they were made at one studio in the 30s or one studio in the 50s, or they had a different crew, or they had different writers and stuff. So I think you can do that, and you could pick out Ford pictures when it's really working. He was very fond of using, he's not really big on using close-ups all the time. Close-ups are exclamation points if you're talking about in terms of what they're actually designed for, and they are. So he's very fond of keeping to long shots and medium shots, and his sense of composition innately is just amazing. You can look at individual frames from a Ford picture, and it's literally like a painting. And then the lighting is not, it's naturalistic, but it's beautifully staged, so someone had to do it. But if you weren't thinking about composition, everything feels right. But most importantly, he would do the practice of cutting in the camera. He would not shoot superfluous material, because if you do that, that gives someone else, particularly the studio or the producer, the ability to go in and recut your material. So he would always work in the ways of shooting bare minimum and shooting exactly what he felt was needed, and then cutting and moving on to when everybody else would shoot all this extra coverage and extra material and stuff. So when it gets edited, because the studio primarily was editing during the studio period, and the studio had the final say, and people did not have final cut back then for the most part. The studio could go in and then pick whatever they wanted and cut it however they want to. So they could have turned a dramatic scene into a sappy romantic scene, and you were stuck with it. But very few people. Hitchcock also would do this as well, to an extent, and it's always to the best of your ability. But Hitchcock and a number of others would follow what Ford was doing in terms of trying to cut in the camera and not shoot extra material, because then that gives the studio leeway to just change the picture. Um, but his primary studio of the studio he was at for the longest time and produced the greatest body of work was Fox, and Fox was eventually under Daryl F. Zanuck for the most part. And Zanuck would actually retain Final Cut and change things. So even though Ford was doing his cutting in the camera, Zanuck would also request changes and be the final say. So even on the Fox films, with Ford cutting in the camera, there's still this stamp of what Zanuck wanted. So there is the argument to be made that even the great successes he had at Fox, it did help that he had to go through, the process of Zanuck being the head of the studio, having the final say on the edit. So that's why there's things that Zanuck requested even in My Darling Clementine. So that's an interesting counterpoint to bring up in regards to cutting in the camera, trying to give you more control in the studio era, but still not necessarily being the end all final say, because again, nobody had final cut because it wasn't a thing. Until Orson Welles got his magic deal for Citizen Kane and basically pissed off most of the industry because everybody's like, he gets that, and we got to do this every day, and we don't have that. What? Um, but interestingly, out of the entire industry, there were very few people who were, accepting to Wells getting this amazing deal, and actually, would treat him like a human being. And one of them was actually Ford, the guy who was supposed to be super grouchy and stuff. And Wells himself said, the only training he ever had, he wanted to kind of go in and not know anything, which is honestly a great approach. But the only training he gave himself is he went in a screening room and watched Stagecoach, 40 times, and that's how he learned how to direct movies. Um, which is a great methodology, actually, because Stagecoach is that good and Stagecoach is that important. But that's one of the great, Hollywood anecdotes. What do you need to do to become a director? Watch Stagecoach 40 times. Um, if only people in the industry today would do that, they might actually learn something. So, um, but and then backtracking a little bit to the cutting of the camera thing, the best and the most often told Ford story in terms of Hollywood anecdotes, and this is based in fact, but it's been told a lot, and it's just a great Hollywood story. Uh, the studio would always send out people to the set, and everybody, basically will like, close up shop and be like, all right, when are they going to leave? Because we can't work with them staring over our shoulder. And they go up to Ford, who has the script in his lap open, and they're like, you're such and such days behind. And, we're already losing money and blah, 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 blah. And he just looks up and he says, how many days did you say we were behind? And they said, "Oh, you're like 3 days behind." And he just looks down and he has the script open and he just tears out like the 3 or 5 pages of script right there, just tears them out right in front of the studio guy and just crumples them up, throws it off. "We're back on schedule now," and closes the script. I didn't like those scenes anyway. So, if that is if that's not a good example of, cutting as you go, I don't know what it is. But that is one of the great Hollywood anecdotal stories, and like I said, I'm pretty sure it has some basis in fact. I'm sure it's probably been embellished a billion times, but that's the best Ford story. Um, so I guess I'll kind of give more of a career overview because that's kind of what I wound up doing. Um, so basically, he had a long-term contract at Fox and did a couple of other films, around that with other studios. He did some films for Warner Brothers, United Artists, and others. And then when the Fox contract expired, he would basically, freelance to other studios on various contracts because at that point, he was, one of, if not the biggest industry director at the time. So he kind of had more clout, obviously, and could negotiate better deals and things. So, he basically, I hate to say lasted, but technically he lasted until the early to mid 1950s, and then had a bunch of different features, some of which worked, some of which didn't work. And then on Mr. Roberts, that's where he had his falling out with Fonda because Ford, was pretty well known for being a heavy drinker, but also not being always the easiest person to work with. And so eventually he was replaced on Mr. Roberts by, I think he was replaced by Mervyn LeRoy. Um, and then that kind of caused Ford to kind of step back for a bit and kind of reconsider a lot of things. So then the features after Mr. Roberts into the early '60s can be very spotty, but there is some good stuff in there. And then when you get to The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, which is, not only what you'd say was his late career masterpiece, but I think it's my favorite Ford film. It's the darkest Ford film, and it's definitely my favorite, and I think one of the greatest films ever made. But Ford did dozens of those, but it's probably the one that I think stands out the most. So it's just proof that somebody, even at the very later stages of their career, can produce seminal work. And then he tried to do some other things like Cheyenne Autumn, which was cut down by the studio. It was supposed to be a big epic western that was sort of a love letter to Native Americans and how they've been badly treated in not only Ford films sometimes, but other multitudes of other westerns. And then his last picture was Seven Women in 1960, I think it was 66 or early 67, which is an interesting picture. Again, by that point in time, I hate to use the phrase trying to be put out to pasture, but you kind of get that feeling of that's what the studios were kind of pushing, trying to push him to do. And of course, he was in worse and worse health over the years. He had some health conditions and stuff that, of course, did not make it easier to keep working. But he kept going pretty close to the end. And Hitchcock would follow a similar tenure of sorts. Of course, basically separated about a decade and a half. Because if you look at Hitchcock's career post Psycho, that's when you start to get all of the intense studio pressures and mandates to make certain films, and the pictures get a bit spotty in terms of there's great moments in them, but they're not really great and they're problematic. And then you have the bright spot of Frenzy in 1972. And then after that, he was able to make Family Plot in 1976, and that was it. And Universal was really trying to also put Hitchcock out to pasture as well. Again, their careers kind of follow a similar path in a lot of ways, not only in the beginning and the breadth of their career, but also the end of their career. Um, so that's basically kind of an overview. And as I mentioned before, it's interesting to note that Ford's preferred actor of the '30s and '40s was Henry Fonda, and also Ford was pretty much viewed as a pretty liberal leaning politically director as well. And then over time, he kind of transitioned from using Fonda in these more hard hitting social drama charged pictures to using John Wayne more and more. And that kind of developed into what became the tried and true John Wayne persona. And then Ford was eventually viewed as being more of a right wing conservative. So then that led a lot of the liberal criticism of the early film analysis days of the '60s and '70s. Well, that made a lot of people say, well, Ford's old and he's not as important and he's not as vigorous as he once was, so we're not going to write about him as much. And I'm like, well, he's still making great pictures. That doesn't make any sense. So that kind of has played into the diminishing of Ford's importance, I think, and the fact that it wasn't as what he was doing wasn't as commercially viable as what Hitchcock was doing, because Hitchcock was basically 10, 15 years removed in terms of his career starting later. But again, I don't know if there is an American director as important as Ford is in terms of career first and career strengths and just writing so much of what is like the playbook of how to be a motion picture director. Because again, he was doing this before most of the greats who came after him. And of course, after the silent film changeover, that caused so many careers to be lost to people who were not able to make the transition over to sound films. And then there were people in the early sound era who didn't make it. So somebody who was able to make that transition and maintain a consistently amazing and strong body of work, and then work within the various studios throughout the studio system, and then still exist and be able to make pictures during the collapse of the studio system, and then the explosion of the free agents of the 1950s being able to negotiate various deals on their own instead of being in a studio contract. and then somebody who's able to make it through the television boom of the 1950s and into the late 1960s is just stunning. So it definitely says, if anything, that Ford had something. If you had to point to one thing, it's like, well, somebody could not do this level of amazing work and last this long if they didn't know what they were doing. And in a lot of ways, Ford wound up writing the playbook again for how to be a motion picture director. John Ford did it. I mean, he is that important. So that's sort of my spiel, like a very, very basic career overview of just like, because it's hard to like cram the longevity of someone having that scope of a career into like 10 minutes or so. So it's very, very, very toned down, forgive me. So I guess we'll talk a little bit about various Ford films, and then these video versions I've set aside. So I guess we'll get the big one out of the way first because it's very big. This is, of course, I think arguably probably it's one of the all-time definitive DVD box sets, simply for the just the scale of it. But it is gotta try and figure out how to get all this on here because it's so massive. It is totally Laserdisc size and weight. But this runs the gamut of Ford's career at 20th Century Fox. This is the iconic 2007 massive Ford at Fox box set. This is very much in the style of what Fox did with their Murnau, Borzage, and Fox set. So it's a big coffee table art piece with a really nice hardcover book inside. But this was the first time all of Ford's Fox titles that are, of course, surviving, because most of his silents are gone. So this runs the gamut from the surviving silent films. Some of these were premieres of newer restorations, like what they did for the cleanup work on the Iron Horse, and then running up to his last films for Fox in the 1940s. But it is a massive set. Let me slip off this sort of obi strip here. But I'm going to try and I don't really think I can open this without it all flopping out, but it just opens book-like, and it's so massive. I'm just have to do it like this, but I'll show you this beautiful hardcover book dedicating really, really lovingly reproduced on-set photos from each of the films, complete with original artwork and lobby programs and transcripts and things. This is a fantastic book, easily a great coffee table piece, but the care and attention to detail that went into this set is just really stunning. Um, show you a. I mean, the stills in here are alone worth it. These are stills from the set of Young Mr. Lincoln, which are just I mean, they're taken directly from the film itself, and you get this wonderful shot. I really love this of Henry Fonda in his full Lincoln costume and makeup, basically horse racing with John Ford on the set they built. So you get all these loving on set photos like that. Um, so yeah, I had they did some smaller box sets of the titles in here, and I think they did 3 or 4 of those, and I had some of those, but I always wanted to get the whole box. And you can actually get this for very cheap now. You can get them on eBay very cheap. The Hamilton Book website, they're a really great online book retailer. They do the old school mail catalogs as well, but they started doing DVDs and Blu-rays. And I think somebody was clearing out a warehouse of these, so you can actually get this for I think it was only like $39.99. It's a fraction of what it originally cost. But this is pretty notorious for the disc packaging being not so good for the disc. So when I got this, I had to actually check all of them. I actually eventually I've got them all housed in a just a separate binder. I have a binder for all of my discs from poorly packaged sets. So got my Ford at Fox discs in there and my Ten Commandments discs in there, stuff like that. I mean, the idea is cool. They put this binder in here, so you get this really nice stylized binder, so it looks like an art portfolio. But what they did was they put all of the discs in here, and they made these little disc hubs, which I mean they should be okay, but it all the discs would come off over the years and get scratched up or warped and things. So even when this came out, you can look up. They had to do like recalls, and it was pretty. This is one of those sets that pretty much most people know that you're going to be looking at least at some discs that are scratched up and probably some that are unplayable. So I was lucky that all of mine were okay, but I had to check all of them. So when I got this thing, I was like, well, I can part out my uh, smaller boxes, but I knew if I had any discs that were shot in this, I was hoping I could replace it with the duplicates I had in these smaller boxes. But thankfully, all of this were fine. There were one or two that had fallen off, but again, this thing was still sealed. So the fact that they were able to make it, from 2007 to 2017 and be okay is pretty cool. So once you take this out, then the other thing in here, which is a pretty cool touch, of course, legally you have to have credits for films, but what they did was they actually printed all of them in. No, they're not exactly in chronological order because a lot of these they have to. Some of them are dual-sided flipper discs because they have to share um, discs for some of these simply for space reasons. But they printed all of the credits on these nice fancy insert sheets. So you get just the basic title list and then the credits nicely printed on here. And just looking at the titles included in this set, I mean, just the breadth of work in these Fox titles, and some of the greatest films ever made are right here on these two sheets. And this would be enough for somebody to have one of the best careers of all time just from the great titles on in this one set. So that this is just one significant portion of Ford's career is massive. And then the last thing in here, they actually were able to reproduce the original souvenir programs for two of the early silents. So here is the original souvenir program for the Iron Horse with this gorgeous artwork on here, and it's really well printed. So it's a full reproduction of what you would have got at the 1924 premiere. So really, really exceptional. And I do love, extras like this because it's not only a historical artifact of sorts, but it's a tangible connection to the past. And, it's actually something that, has some value as opposed to Warner Brothers cranking out another box with Casablanca coasters in it. I don't need a luggage tag for Casablanca, guys. And then the other one they reprinted the souvenir program for the classic Four Sons. So again, just a really really nice touch. And try and do this. So. And then the only other thing they commissioned the Ford. They made a special documentary for this set. The also entitled John Ford at Fox. So that's included in here as well on DVD. And you can get that separately, and you can get the they did 3 box sets of they did box of silence, a box of the main ones, and then a box of comedies. So you can get most of the films that are that are in this set on DVD separately, and there are a few that are out on Blu-ray. But unfortunately, I don't think we're going to see all of these come to Blu-ray. Not in the near future, but unfortunately, probably not ever. So that's why I was happy to finally get this because there are a significant number of features that are exclusive to this set. And some of these had never been released on home video before, especially the silent versions in a official um, studio release anywhere. So I cannot recommend this set highly enough. If any set had to ever get the title of film school in a box, I mean, this is it. Like, I mean, the Criterion Bergman set is great. This is film school in a box. Like, I mean, this you will learn more about the craft of motion pictures from this one thing than anything else in your life. It is all encompassing. And again, this is only one part of Ford's entire career, but And of course, there's been some later work. Grapes of Wrath got a new restoration, has a beautiful Blu-ray. Criterion has done Young Mr. Lincoln, and they've also done My Darling Clementine. So there are a number of titles in here that have been upgraded to Blu-ray. I have some of those, but the vast majority of these titles, you're still going to have to go back to this Ford at Fox set, especially all of the Silence. There's only been one or two of the early Silence that have been released on Blu-ray, and I think both of those are by Kino Lorber, but it's just basically a HD version of the masters made for this set. But again, this is one of the iconic DVD sets, and again, it's totally Laserdisc dimensions. Like it's the same shape, size, and weight as the Star Wars Definitive Collection Laserdisc set. So if you're big into boxes, this is one of the great box sets to just have on the shelf and display. I can't recommend it highly enough, and especially because it's being blown out for $40 online now. Everybody should have one of these, but just be careful because you very will likely have some scratch discs at least, but you'll have to check all of them. So yeah, that is the big one that everybody should, if they don't have it, they should know about it. But it was always super expensive, and all I could afford were the three smaller boxes. So I was finally able to upgrade those. But yeah, like I said, this thing is going for under $50 on eBay, and also I got mine from Hamilton Books. I think they still have them in stock. They ship them really, really well. Their shipping is dirt cheap. So for about $40, you can get the whole Ford at Fox box set, which is crazy because it was like, I think it was like retailing for like 350 or something. But that was during that, like the peak pinnacle of DVD heyday. So it is literally like one of the most lavishly produced DVD box sets ever, really. I mean, it is a stunning love letter to Ford's career and belongs in everybody's collection, especially at this price point. So again, if you've never seen any of these, this is the easiest place to start, and what you get for $39.99 is amazing. So I would suggest everybody pick one of these up before they're gone, because it's going to be a very long time before any of these come to Blu-ray. I mean, we've gotten some, but I don't see everything from the Ford at Fox sets, coming to Blu-ray, unfortunately, because of the way physical media is the studios are trying to phase stuff out. So unless Fox license, well, now it's Disney, so now there's even less of a chance because they seem to already be closing off the classic Fox library. So unless they reverse that and there's some really great label who decides they want to tackle John Ford, and yeah, outside of that, I don't think we're going to see Blu-rays of the rest of the set, unfortunately, ever. um, Moving on to Warner Brothers, who has the most titles of Ford on DVD and Blu-ray outside of the Ford at Fox set, I would probably say. There's two main collections they did that if you get these, you get most of the Ford titles outside of a few outliers. So there's two versions of this set. It's under the title of the John Wayne, John Ford collection. So it's basically all of the titles that Warner has the rights to that Ford did starring John Wayne. But the first version included the Peter Bogdanovich documentary and was a little bit smaller. And then Peter Bogdanovich made the documentary directed by John Ford in the 70s. And then he did like a expanded, reworked version for DVD. And they put that in the first version of this set. And then a couple years later, when they did the box set of The Searchers, the Ultimate Collector's Edition, they redid this set and then put in some extra titles that had come out on DVD since the first set, and it just loses that documentary, which you can get separately. And if you read some of the books on Ford, then you don't really need that documentary, but it's nice to have. So this is the second bigger version of the John Wayne, John Ford collection, and it's a little bit dinged up, but I'd always wanted to get this, and these can actually go for pretty cheap on eBay now. As you can see, it's one of the big Warner slipcase sets with just a bunch of full-size DVDs shoved in them. So, but this is one of their more stuffed ones because it's not only expanded, it actually includes the full Ultimate Collector's Edition of The Searchers. So this is the one you'll want to go for because it has some of the really great films and it has extra ones from the first version. So this is actually, I think, the best packaging for this film. It's the best artwork, but I know I was saying before the transfer is not the greatest. This is the revamped special edition of Stagecoach. Again, it's a little bit too contrasty on this transfer, but it was newly cleaned up, so it's cleaner than the older DVD that's based on the Laserdisc master. So I mean, it's watchable. It's okay, but it's a little too contrasty. But it does have a nice second disc with some great extras that are still exclusive to this. So if you pick up this set for some of the other titles, you can get the extras on here because Criterion did not pick up all of these extras. Then you have the absolutely stunning film, The Long Voyage Home, which was one of the films where I believe this was one of the ones where Ford worked with Greg Toland before Citizen Kane, and Toland was really starting to experiment heavily with his deep focus photography technique, which he fully realized on Kane. So he was doing that with Ford just before and concurrently to that. And then also includes the Technicolor Classic 3 Godfathers, which has almost every Ford picture has been remade at some point, even if it's not a credited remake, or it's been so heavily lifted from that when you finally see these Ford classics, you feel like you've almost seen them before. And this I saw as a kid because I always loved Pedro Almendarez, and For Much With Love, of course. So I was really excited to see one of his really major earlier roles. And then, of course, part one of the Cavalry trilogy, Fort Apache, which this is a really nice transfer. And this is one of the few that the Studio Warner line put out on Blu-ray, which we'll get to in a second. So then, of course, part two, And She Wore a Yellow Ribbon with this fantastic artwork. And again, Warner Archive has put this out on Blu-ray. So a couple of these are out on Blu-ray, but you still have to get this set for the titles that are not out in HD yet. And then, oh, I forgot I didn't even talk about Ford's World War II experience yet. But this was the picture he made right after the end of the war from, it came out in 1945. And to be honest, this is probably the best film about the war itself. This is They Were Expendable, which is just a phenomenal piece of work. Really, really well done, and really gets across the weight of the experience that all of the soldiers were going through throughout the war. And if you've never seen it, this again, I think this is probably the best film actually about World War II. Best Years of Our Lives is the best film about post World War II. And is frequently on the great World War II movies list. So is From Here to Eternity, and both belong there. But for the best film actually about the war and what people were going through, I think this is probably it. Um, and then lastly, before you get to the Searchers, it includes, I think this is one of the newer additions to this second version, includes Wings of Eagles, which was a John Ford directing a John Wayne vehicle that was, of course, about pilots, and it's basically an aerial picture. So this is one of the ones you got extra for getting this later version of the box. But the real draw is this really awesomely packaged box reissue of The Searchers, which, let's see if I can dig this out, because it's a little unwieldy because this thing is so big. Let's see if I can get this. Trying to keep everything together so it doesn't go everywhere. So this is the master that later appeared on Blu-ray, and the Blu-ray is a little bit tweaked from there. So practically every version of the Searchers has different color. So this is the really nice Ultimate Collector's Edition box. So and you can actually get this by itself. You can see it on eBay. It's very cheap now, but it's one of these really nice custom Warner sets, and you get this awesome still of Wayne as Ethan on the back, and it has the sort of aged texture style to give it the old-timey Western feel, for lack of a better term. But this one, you get these nice little extras, if I can slip them out. So you get these two little pamphlets that house some extra material, so they look like this. and they have this cool little fold out. But in this one, you get this one's really cool. You get a full reproduction of the original Dell comic book version of the Searchers. And if you think about it, this is a strange film to have adapted for a children's comic book. But I mean, it's not just an excerpt; it's the entirety of this original, which I assume this would have been made in the release year of 1956. So and it's full color and it is the entirety of the film in a comic book form. So this is a really, really amazing addition. This is one of the best um, studio box set additions to any film I've ever seen. Not just to have a picture, but to have the entire comic book version reproduced. And then they also included, this is actually I believe this is the exhibitor's press book because it's not just a opening release press book, but this is literally to the exhibitor because it has all of the critical blurbs and the posters, but it also has tips on how to exhibit the film and where you should book it, and then the different posters you could order. So if you look on the back here, it literally tells you these are the different posters and the sizes for your theater. So this is what they would have given to exhibitors, and as you can see, you have the wide sheet, the long version of the one sheet. Then this was designed for theater lobbies. This is a floor mounted poster inside of a glass case. Here's the regular one sheet, and then here is a wide. I think it's actually wider than a quad poster. Yeah, this is the wide 24 sheet version of the film's poster art. So if you had a theater that could accommodate a super wide, huge massive poster, well, then you could order this one. So yeah, you could tell this was a one of these fancy DVD sets where somebody really took the time to make it a bit more special than the latest version of the Wizard of Oz with a miniature snow globe or something silly. And then in the other one, again the same art, but then I'll shout out the other principles. This one is also really cool. It is a this is a letter from the Marion C. Cooper, who produced The Searchers, but also, of course, most famously produced King Kong. This is a letter to Jack Warner. So this has been actually reproduced right down to the signature and everything. And then you get a reproduction of inter-office communication about, and this literally lists 4 points where this picture is brutal in spots to the point of being daring, as follows. So it's basically talking about these are the points where we think the picture is going too far. As you can see, this is an actual Warner Brothers intermemo. So this is the studio talking about the film, and it's actually been reproduced and it's been stapled exactly as it would have been back in the day. So that is a really, really cool touch because none of this stuff is really seen by public eyes. And then they also included some really nice on-set stills. So there's a car for you. So we were talking earlier about the car that's supposed to appear in the film somewhere. Well, there's one for you. So, um, but yeah, it's mostly I think these were original publicity stills, but you get a whole bunch of them in here. Um, so I mean, these are extraordinarily well done, and of course, very well printed and everything. But yeah, this is one of the best sets that Warner Brothers ever did in terms of uh, actually including stuff. And of course, I got this way after it came out, so I was not able to get the reproduction poster. But if you bought this originally, you could get a reproduction of the original Searchers one sheet. So much to my chagrin, I can't send this off and say, "Hey, do you have any free posters left?" But that was, something studios were more willing to do back in the day. But of course, you can get reprints of most any poster on eBay or all posters these days. But still, it would have been nice. um, so those are the extras that come along with this. So you can get the 2 disc DVD by itself, but this is what you get inside of this really cool little slip box. So I mean, it's you don't have to have this, but it's just so well done that. And then of course you have the pretty standard Warner Digipack for DVDs, and I think they really established an art form with the manufacture of these because I think most of the Warner Digipacks are like some of the best packaging for certain films. So of course you have the cover shot reproduced here, and it's a really great choice for the searchers. But again, really great image usage. As you can see, it actually matches over onto the inner flap before you open it, and then you have the feature disc and the special features disc. So again, this was the first time they made a lot of special features, so they really premiered on here. And of course, all of this carried over onto the Blu-ray, but of course, that's just a standard Blu-ray with no inserts or fancy extras and stuff. So this is a really cool Warner set, and again, this is one of the best Warner boxes of swag, as I like to call them, that they ever did. And unlike the modern Blu-ray ones, which are so big they don't fit a shelf, as you can see, this one is actually DVD sized, and it slots right back in the box set along with the rest of them. But of course, because it's a little bit taller, as you can see, they had to actually make the box bigger. And so it's a little unwieldy because the searcher's box is so big. But again, you can get the this revamped version of this set for really, really cheap these days. I think it actually pops up for like less than 20 bucks on eBay, like even 15 or less. So, and again, some of the greatest films ever made are contained here, and you get the really fancy extras for the searchers. And so the other Warner box that I finally recently got, this is, more of the, diehard classics and obscure films. But again, some really important titles are in here. So I think it's very important, but it's a lot harder to come by and it's still pretty expensive. This is the Ford Film Collection, also by Warner Brothers. The box is a little dinged up, but they did this concurrently with a similar artwork box of more obscure John Wayne titles, but that one's really a mixed bag in terms of quality. This one, though, you get not only the I'm trying to think of the right word, the still great, but studio kind of messed around with film Shy and Autumn, and the amazing film Sergeant Rutledge, which is a really great film that really deals with the issue of racism a lot earlier than most other people were. And of course, you have probably the best performance in a Ford film of Woody Strode, who was one of Ford's great stock company members, and it's probably his best performance. It's his most I'm trying to think. It's much more of a lead part than a character part, and that in and of itself was uncommon for a major Hollywood release of that era. And then I know I mentioned before, Mary of Scotland is usually not written very well about, but it's amazingly made. So I think it's actually quite good. And then you get the early films, The Lost Patrol, which is a really great film that a lot of people don't like it as much now because it is a bit stylized, but it was one of the early films for Boris Karloff to really shine. And that was also something he was able to point to actually get him some other jobs besides nothing but horror parts. But the most important film in this set, let me show you the back so you can kind of see the cover blurbs and stuff. But well, I guess I should have shown the DVD covers first. So here's the Cheyenne On DVD cover, and this was the first time they tried to really do a cleaned up version of the well, what was originally released, but then it was kind of cut down over the years. So this runs about a little over 2.5 hours, but it was originally supposed to be like a 3 hour epic that the studio chopped down. And then here is the aforementioned Sergeant Rutledge from 1960. This is another great film that's not talked about enough. And then I know most people hate this, but I think Mary of Scotland is really, really good. And yeah, I mean, it's definitely all the dialogue is from a stage play from the 1930s, so it's not going to be the most involving thing, but the direction and the cinematography and just the overall impact of it is really, really something. Um, and of course, I mentioned the Lost Patrol, but this is a great um, this is a one of Ford's great films. It's from 1934, so it is, earlier on in his sound career, but it's also really great for Boris Karloff fans because it's a really showy Karloff performance. But the big one of this and one of the greatest films ever made is, of course, the 1935 Academy Award-winning masterpiece, The Informer. Which if you've never seen this, this is one of Ford's iconic films. It deals, of course, with essentially, informing upon, the IRA, and it's really working with, story materials that nobody was touching, especially not in 1935. So this really is a groundbreaking picture in a lot of different ways, and is not talked about enough. And I think part of that is because it is from 1935, and it's not one of those Academy Award winners people like to bring up because it is about a tough subject matter and it is really emotionally draining in a lot of different ways. But this has been inspirational to a lot of different people. You see a lot of this turn up in especially if you're a big Sergio Leone fan like me, in Sucker, all the flashbacks to Ireland are very reminiscent to Ford's The Informer. And he also has some stylistic breakthroughs in this film that really inform all of his career masterpieces in the late 30s into the 40s, right up into Grapes of Wrath. So, in a lot of ways, if you want to find a picture to start with Ford, the Informer is a good place to start if you want to work chronologically, and if you're not really big into silent films. This is a great place to start because this is one of the great films. So, sticking with Warner Brothers, this is the one DVD they put out that wasn't in any box set, and I always meant to pick it up, and then I finally did. And of course, Warner Archive has now announced they're going to bring it to Blu-ray this year, which is great because this is another underrated classic and one of the great westerns from 1950. This is Wagon Master, and this. If I did inspire the television show, which I believe, yeah, it did inspire Wagon Train, the long-running famous television western. So, this is very like most of the Ford classic westerns. It's very prototypical. Again, when you finally see this, you'll feel like you've seen it before a thousand times because it's been lifted from and blatantly ripped off about a bajillion times. So, and this is still a really good DVD. It's got a really nice commentary. And again, this was like, I think there's also a pretty decent Laserdisc of this. I think it's from I want to say it's in the RKO collection, but this was a really good transfer. And again, Warner Archive is going to do it on Blu-ray this year, which is really exciting. So I guess they were waiting for me to buy this on DVD finally. So I was like, I finally found Wagon Master. This is great. And then, like, literally the same week, Warner Archive announces for like October, John Ford's 1950 Wagon Master. And I'm like, can I have my $7 pack now so I can get the Blu-ray instead? Uh, so let's see. Then talking about Blu-ray, I guess we'll do the last DVDs and Blu-rays before I dig into the box of Laserdisc. But just talking about other Ford titles on disc currently. These are all individuals from individual discs on Blu-ray from various labels, and there isn't like a big Ford box set. Although Warner Archive's done a number of Ford titles now, so I'm thinking maybe that, well, they don't really go for box sets, but if they did, they could do one. So going chronologically, this one's actually out of print now. This is a Kino Lorber disc that I got from one of their sales, and they announced they were gonna stop selling it because it was going out of print. So I figured I might as well get it before it was gone. And I don't think anybody else has put this out since. So this is an interesting film. It's from 1937, but this is I think it's been remade after this. So it's the first version of the Hurricane. And really nice vintage art. It's one of the really good Kino artworks. And it's one of the few Kino discs with extras. It's got the trailer and it's got a really good commentary by Joseph McBride, who, again, his book Searching for Ford is the best book on Ford. So when they get him to do some of these Ford commentaries, they're just it's like a full on masterclass on the audio commentary track, and then you get the standard Kino style rear. But again, this is one of their releases that's actually really, really good and has a nice extra. And this is one of the films that there aren't a lot of good releases. So this was really a welcome addition. But of course, it's now gone out of print because we can't have everything. And then Fox did a couple, as I mentioned before, on Blu ray. So, of course, this one you can get pretty cheap, and again, it's from the really awesome restoration that I've seen a print of, and really did a lot of amazing work for the photography of this film because the photography of this film is so important. Again, shot by Greg Toland just before Citizen Kane. Again, using his deep focus technique, but also trying to give a sense of the iconic Dorothy Ann Lange photographs of the Dust Bowl and the Depression. So this is the Fox Blu-ray of Grapes of Wrath. And again, you can get this very, very cheap. And since Disney has taken over the Fox library, I don't know if or when this will ever come to 4K. So this is an amazing Blu-ray. Can't recommend it highly enough, and it's super cheap. So this is an easy. Everybody should have a copy of this. It does have another McBride commentary, and it's got a number of other extras that were all on the previous DVD versions. But otherwise, it's just a plain single disc Fox Blu-ray, no extras. But even the cover art's pretty good, even though it's sort of modernized. And of course, it's in color, not black and white. But at least it's not Paramount still selling that damn colorized It's a Wonderful Life. So don't let the cover fool you. But for modern cover jobs of classics on Blu-ray, this is pretty good. But yeah, this is one of those really great Blu-rays. I still like to use this as a test disc because it really gets across the amazing Tolan photography like nothing else. And then from the next year, we have the classic How Green Was My Valley, which is another. This is one of those films you may not think it's a type of film for you, but then when you actually see it, you're like, "Holy crap, this was great!" But this is another one that Fox had done on Blu-ray because, of course, again, now it's Disney. Um, but again, just a single Blu-ray. This is actually in the Best Buy bins for a while, so you can get this for like $5.99 or less, and it's a really great transfer and one of the really great affordable classic black and white films on Blu-ray. And you get I think there's a few extras on here. Yeah, and a couple extras, and again another commentary featuring Joe McBride. And this is one I actually finally picked up recently, but it was out for a while, and then Blu-rays in stores kind of dried up, so I wasn't able to get it while it was out. But it's pretty. It's from they made this in 2012, but it's one of the few the regular Warner label did. This is the Blu-ray of Fort Apache, and is a really nice Blu-ray. It's a good encoding. It looks even much more improved over the DVD. It carries over the commentary, but those are the only real extras. But just really nice to have more classic Ford in HD. And then we get to the aforementioned Searchers, which uses the art of the old Snapper DVD and final Laserdisc. And as we talked about before, this is a super early Blu-ray, so that's why if you look on the back, it has the kind of weird layout with the sort of tech box Warner would put on their early discs. So this is like an old, I think this is actually VC1 encoding. So it's very early on when they were still using that. And again, the color is also different on this disc from the two disc DVD. So every version of the Searchers looks different in terms of color. You'll have to look up. There's a really involved thread on the Home Theater Forum. There's also a Blu-ray.com thread. There's also an interview Robert Harris did with Ned Price, who's the head of the Warner Brothers video department, about the color of the Searchers. So there's a ton of information, and everybody has a different opinion. But this also carries over all the extras from the two disc DVD. But again, it's a super early Blu-ray, so it really needs to be revisited. And Again, unless you sit there and literally look at all the different versions, I mean, you'll be okay if you're just watching this film for the first time, or you just want one version that's good overall. But I can agree that some of the color on this is just it's kind of weird. But again, I'm not a trained expert. I don't have a certificate, so it's an educated guess. And then lastly, this is the it's a Paramount release, and originally, for some unknown reason, they put this out only in Region Two, but it's a region-free disc. So myself and a lot of other people just imported it because it was literally like under $10. And then they finally released it here in the States. So that, of course, is Manor Shot Liberty Valance, and that's why it has the British rating logos on it. And as you can see, it has the modern Paramount dark sky, gritty looking Western art that was also on Eldorado that I pulled out a while ago. So that's how you can tell apart these newer masters they did. But the master for this is not kind of new, and there's some DNR going on, and it doesn't look as good as it should. I mean, it's better than the DVD remaster, of course, because it is HD and it's the best version we have. But unfortunately, this let me make sure it does have a mono track, but it's a lossy mono track, and it's got the 5.1 remix that you don't need, but it doesn't have any of the extras that were on the DVD sets. So to talk about the DVDs really quick. This is the it was called the Centennial series, but it's the line of two disc special editions for like the creme de la creme of Paramount titles that they started doing in like '07, '08. This one's from '09. But this is the Liberty Valance one, and this has a whole second disc with extras and stuff. And so I had to actually go out and track this down because I just wanted the extras. So you'll have to do that for the extras for the film because they're not on the Blu-ray. And this is the slip box this series originally used. But usually, if you find these, because they didn't print a lot of them, but usually you just find them as just the DVD by itself. So you do get, they did do custom artwork for all of these, and they're packaged well. And they tried to make them look fancier by giving them spine numbers, I guess, in sort of a nod towards Criterion, but they did these for like, like the big seller. So they did one for Sunset Boulevard, they did ones for Breakfast at Tiffany's, and then they did Liberty Valance. I don't know how many they did, but this was when they were finally doing newer masters, and some of this stuff made it over to Blu-ray. Um, but on these DVDs, it's like a mix of new HD masters they made, and then like older ones they reworked. And this is like one they need to do a new master from, but this is the only release that has any sort of extras. And again, they actually gave you a little insert with a chapter listing and a little blurb about the film, and then it's just a standard 2 disc tray. But again, this is the only release that has any sort of extras to it. But that being said, because I'm me and I'm just picky and persnickety like that, I actually, if I watch the film, I don't watch either of those. I actually go back to, it had a cover before this, but this was rebranded under the John Wayne line. But this is the first Paramount DVD, and it's got an older transfer that just feels a bit more natural. It's got a little bit more video noise, it's a little bit contrasty, but for some reason, I like the look of this better. Whereas this transfer got reused on the Blu-ray, but I don't know. This was just the one I watched for years, and I still kind of like it better. There's also some stretching going on this DVD that I'm not really a fan of. Like it's just like a very slight stretching. Um, but again, anamorphic transfer. This has the glossy mono, so usually if I watch the film, I just rewatch this or I look at the Blu-ray. But this is a film that needs a 4K scan really bad because I'm not really happy with any of these. The fact that I'm talking about the original DVD, I think this was originally put out in like 2000 actually. So it's an old Paramount DVD. This is just repackaged, but I still like this older transfer because I'm just weird like that. And then got to have some Laserdisc action. So Just going chronologically, of course, actually a good majority of Ford films are available on Laserdisc and decent editions. After digital sound came or into action on laser, but of course, I have a decent selection, so we'll talk about some of those. These two, of course, we talked about on the last show for 1939. So here's the release of Stagecoach. Trying to get the glare off. Sucks when you find a nice copy in shrink wrap and then you don't think, hey, I got to do a live stream. I got to worry about glare. And I know we were talking about this before. So it reproduces original art. And this is one of the good Warner Brothers jackets from the early 90s. I think this is from 90. Let's see. Where did you put it, Warner? Yeah, 93. So it's still got the colored picture squares on the back, but this is a really good transfer, and they reused this for the first Snapper case DVD. And if you put it against the Criterion Blu-ray, it has the same grayscale and stuff, so it doesn't have the problems of the two-disc special edition DVD. But Stagecoach, to talk about it a little bit individually, if there was one prototypical Western to rule them all, it's Stagecoach. Stagecoach is the film that basically came out in 1939 and reinvigorated the Western as a viable genre. And not just that, as a viable A picture, because Westerns were still considered primarily as a B picture form. And this was also the film that fully cemented John Wayne as a screen icon, because after the box office failure of the Big Trail in 1930, he then had to go and make all of these crappy and cheapy B picture westerns just turned out essentially for an entire decade before John Ford decided, you know what, let's get him in here and let's actually, do something. And they actually made this Stagecoach was made for United Artists, actually. It was not made for a major studio, and that was also part of what made it different and allowed them to be a bit freer in their storytelling, because this was really different for the time. And the massive success of Stagecoach was not only financially successful to everybody because it was at one of the smaller, more independent studios, but it basically prodded everybody else into going, hey, we can actually make great high budget westerns. It's a thing. Um, of course, 1939, you also have to talk about Warner's making the big Technicolor A budget Dodge City. So the 1-2 punch of Dodge City and Stagecoach in the same year really is what made Westerns a thing, in terms of being full on A budget features. And then, of course, like last week, you have Young Mr. Lincoln, also from 1939. This is the standard CBS Fox release, which is pretty nice art, even though it's a little dinged up and the cover's seen some better days. But really, really nice and very well representative of this film. And again, the fact that Ford made two all-time great classics in the same year in the middle of the golden year of Hollywood. I mean, I don't know what else you can say. I mean, if any one person made either Stagecoach or Young Mr. Lincoln in an entire career, that would be enough to get him into a history book. But Ford did both of them in the same year, and then turns around in 1940 and makes Grapes of Wrath. So here is the Laserdisc version. As you can see, again, more of a modern colorized bunching of famous stars. And again, this is what they used on the tapes. You can see there's a lot of dead space on the sides. You can basically just imagine, this would be the VHS version. But this one is not easy to find. It's not rare. It's not expensive, but it's just not very common. It's a really nice transfer. It's got a really nice bunch of liner notes, and it's not a gatefold, but it's a fancier disc than what Fox usually did. This is very similar to their release of Captain of Castile that I have, the Tyrone Power Classic. I don't think this has a commentary on it. Trying to think if this has any extra features. I don't think it does, but you do get the nice liner notes. And then this one is a pretty hard to find late release from '98. It also includes a AC3 track, because this film did apparently come out in multi-channel. So it's got a PCM matrix and a AC3 track. The 1955 film Mr. Roberts that we talked about before. This is the film that Ford eventually just basically got removed from, and it was finished by Mervyn Leroy. And this was partially because Henry Fonda was the producer of the film. He had done it on stage for years, and Ford was trying to do things to really kind of change it from the way the play was written and the tone of the story. So it's an interesting, if maybe a tad dated, and you do kind of feel like there's two different sides going on as you watch it, if you know about that. Um, but it is a classic, and it's got great performances from all of the lead actors. But it's very uncommon to find this Laserdisc version because it was quickly supplanted by the Snapper Case DVD. I think this has it has a couple extras. Has a commentary by Jack Lemmon himself, which is a really cool listen, and a couple little extras along with the trailer that I think all of these made it over to DVD. But this was really cool to find the Laserdisc of. Now, this is the one that I would recommend to everybody because it's actually pretty common and very cheap to pick up. But it was later supplanted by the late release version that had a different transfer, a different color. But this is from '91. But this is the anniversary version of the Searchers, and it was credited as a new Technicolor restoration. And some people prefer this over all other versions in terms of color accuracy, even though it is an old Laserdisc. Um, I really like this version. It's not perfect because, of course, it's an old, 420i Laserdisc Master from 1991. So, of course, it's not going to be perfectly accurate, but I really like how this looks on Laserdisc, and it has PCM mono. It's very cheap. It's easy to pick up and has this gorgeous cover art that's exclusive to this laser release. I think this is a section of one of the various posters, but the rear, of course, is the standard Warner style with the three pictures. But you can see these are actually really well printed with deep color and stuff. So it's definitely a cut up, several cuts above the usual typical, you know, standardized, nobody's paying attention Warner jacket for Laserdisc. And it does have a little bit of behind the scenes footage as an extra and the original trailer. So you can get a few extras on here. So if you do pick up any Ford title on Laserdisc, I would suggest this version of the Searchers because you can get it for like $2 or $3. It's very common, very frameable too, and it has this exclusive master on it that looks really good. And then getting on to the later career, this is another one of the films like I was talking about where it's kind of problematic, but it has interesting stuff in it. And but it's where at this point in time in the collapse of the studio system and the control that certain stars had over production and stuff, it caused a lot of problems. And so you had many more cooks in the kitchen essentially. So this is a film that I think has good stuff in it, but it's not, unfortunately, not a great film. This is The Horse Soldiers with Wayne and Bill Holden, and this is an MGM release. This is another film where there's not a real. There's a DVD of this, and then I can't remember if it's one of the ones where there's like a okay Blu-ray, but I can't remember if it even has a Blu-ray or not. But it's a pretty nice laser disc. Has a typical MGM style gatefold, and a pretty good transfer on here with a PCM track. So definitely recommended if you see it for cheap, and it's kind of a glossy cover too, so that's pretty good. And then this one is a little harder to find, and it's actually a really interesting film. This is, of course, like I said before, it's Ford's last film from '66. This is Seven Women, also a letterbox MGM edition, but it's a little bit later because you can always tell by the letterbox on the top being of a different font for their later discs. And it's rather uncommon. It's usually goes for a bit more. So again, if you find this, definitely grab it. Of course, it's out on DVD as well, but this has a nice PCM track and a pretty nice transfer too. So it was cool to find this on Laserdisc to find Ford's final completed theatrical feature. Um, and then in terms of box sets, there's a couple. Um, so I did this in my regular videos, but this is the really awesome Republic anniversary box set of The Quiet Man with the really cool poster and everything tucked inside. So this is very much like the other Republic boxes. It's just pretty much the regular disc, but because they wanted to promote it as a big special edition and they added a poster and a lobby card, they put it in a box instead of a gatefold. So usually you find this and the corners are shot and it's missing the extras, but it's actually a really nice transfer for the age. But now this has been fully restored in 4K, and you can get the Olive signature release on Blu-ray, which is amazing. But this Laserdisc is really nice to have, as with the awesome packaging and the extras, and just to see the best it could look on disc at the time is pretty cool. But then again, I must be weird because I I like seeing stuff like that. Even if there's a like fully awesome, amazing 4K restoration out there, sometimes I just like to see how it looked on disc back in 1992. Um, this one I just wanted to pull out because it is somewhat associated and it is so crazy rare and it is definitely my rarest Laserdisc. This, of course, was not directed by John Ford, but Ford is typically credited as doing some second unit stuff to help out because he did visit the set. And that, of course, is the Alamo. This is the uncut long version, the roadshow version of the film that was famously rediscovered on a single print in the late 80s, early 90s, transferred to Laserdisc. And then this is the very rare 83 reissue from the late 90s. So this is incredibly rare, which is why I still have it sealed up because I'm afraid to open it actually. But I'm finally gonna crack the seal and watch this because this is the only release of the roadshow version, and MGM has let that single print rot to the point of the restoration that people have been doing petitions for would now be an extremely cost prohibitive thing because the single element has deteriorated extremely in the interim. So if you look this up on DVD, you'll only be able to see the short theatrical release version. Um, and I mean the long version, yeah, it's I mean it's not it's never going to be a great picture. It still has flaws, but it's still really interesting to see what, Wayne was like as a director and to see a big full scale epic made about the Alamo at the time period. So it's got great stuff in it. And I think the long version is definitely better than the short version. But yeah, unfortunately, this is the only way to ever see the long version to date. And again, this is the AC3 reissue where they were able to do a nice AC3 track. And then this one, most people don't know about because it's very uncommon, and I never thought I would find it. But thankfully, one of the group sellers in the Laserdisc Forever group had it as part of one of his sales. I was able to pick it up for pretty cheap. This is the actually by Image and Turner Home Entertainment, so it's basically an Image box. It's the John Wayne RKO collection with some really interesting titles, but as you can see, it actually includes the first two parts of the Cavalry trilogy and their best releases on Laserdisc. All of these have PCM mono tracks, and some of these were released earlier, but these have better transfers. So this is a really nice little box with some interesting and really good Wayne titles mixed in with the first two parts of the Ford Cavalry trilogy. So this is a really nice laser set, even though, of course, all of these have been released to DVD and some to Blu-ray by this time. This is very not easy to find and usually will go for quite a bit on eBay simply because of the rarity. But if you do come across one of these, I do recommend it because it's a really nice box with one of these attached hinges. So it's kind of fancy. And then there's this really awesome booklet that gives you a full page on each film. So it has some of the trailers, but it's not like it's loaded with extras. But this is just a really nice, pretty rare laser set. And it's the only way to get the two cavalry films. So that's pretty much all of the Ford releases I have on disc. I used to have, of course, some VHS tapes, but I did phase out most of my tape collection. I still have a few things here and there, but it's primarily just stuff from childhood nostalgia or a few things that I picked up to see if it was a different transfer, but it's nothing really special. So I did have a number of Ford titles on tape that I picked up while I was a kid, and I was uh, getting more and more into classic films, and so I used to have Stagecoach on tape, and I had I actually may still have Liberty Valance on tape. So, and that's interesting to see it in 133 because it's VistaVision, so it's not exactly. I mean, it's opened up a bit and it is pan and scanned a bit, but it still actually kind of works in a weird way. I never noticed it being like super chopped on the sides. But that's how I first saw Liberty Valance was in on pan and scan VHS tape. Oh boy, I've been too busy talking about Ford. I got a lot, a lot of conversation to catch up on. All right, let's see. Oh wow, still got some haircut talk, of course. Um, let's see into the Ford stuff. Yes, the Ford at Fox box set is totally Laserdisc dimensions. So I actually have it on. It doesn't fit on any shelf, and I have it on top of a shelf next to my box of T2, My Fair Lady. So it's right there with my oversized Laserdisc boxes because it fits on nothing. But it looks amazing just sitting out. So just have the side with, gosh, let me try and get this back up here. So I always can just look over and I have Hank staring at me. So it is totally LD size in every way, shape, and form. So again, the fact that these are being blown out for super cheap, everybody should have one of these. It's amazing. So again, HamiltonBooks.com. They still have copies. That's where I got mine. But just be sure and check all of your discs. So because you can pick it up for cheap, but because of the unfortunate packaging style they use for the discs, you might have to replace some of those with just extra copies. So hopefully, if you get one of these and you do have a disc with a problem, it's not one of the exclusive ones. But I got mine. It was still sealed, and I've had it about 2 years now, and it was fine. So I was like, wow. I always read all the horror stories about people getting bad discs, but it was okay. Wow, what do you know? Um, oh yeah, and I should point out, as Ronald mentioned, uh, John Ford of all people made a Shirley Temple movie. Wee Willie Winky is a Shirley Temple movie, and it's actually great. So, and everybody loves Shirley Temple, but it's not. You don't think of a Shirley Temple picture and go, "Oh wow, what a cinematic achievement." It's not. It's supposed to be a movie for children and families, but Wee Willie Winky is actually a great movie, and it was also done in a way Ford had gotten. I forget what happened, but he had basically gotten on somebody's bad side, and it was like, you got to do a Shirley Temple movie now. And she was the biggest moneymaker for Fox, so it was an important assignment, but everybody kind of saw it as a, you got to make the movie with the kid. And so Ford's like, man, this is gonna be terrible. You should never work with kids. And then even Ford was like, she's amazing. She can do everything. And it was one of the best working experiences I ever had. And she was that young and she was already such a great actress. So they actually got on really well. John Ford supposedly, being the stereotypical grouch director to end all grouch directors, actually having a fantastic working relationship with Shirley Temple of all people. And that is the one Shirley Temple picture you can point to and say, that's actually a great picture. And there are other great Shirley Temple pictures, but again, they're more under the banner of being a movie for children. But that one is actually great. And then you go, wait, John Ford made a Shirley Temple movie? How does that work? John Wayne is so tall he can barely fit on the cover of the box. um Trying to get to all the Ford comments and then I'll get to some of the others. Um McBride's searching for Ford. It's not expensive. I think if you get it now, it's in paperback form. I think it's like 20 or 25 bucks, but I think I'm just gonna try and get the hardcover because I with books that that are that big that I know I'm gonna flip through a lot. And I got the hardcover from the library, and I love the cover art on it. I think it's still about 20 or 25 bucks, even used, but I think I'm going to hit up eBay and see if I can find a cheap copy or something. But yeah, because I think Amazon or other places just sell the paperback version now. But in any case, it's fantastic, and even at 20 25 bucks, it's well worth it because it is a thick, well researched tome. But again, if you're just getting into Ford, I don't know if it's going to be. I don't know if you want to go whole hog like right off the bat, you know. So again, if you want like the starter book, the Scott Iman book is a lot more of an overview, and you get all of the most of the relevant details. But I think that one's actually called Print the Legend, so that one's a more digestible Ford book. Um, Lossy mono is always better than no mono. Yes, always, Deck, always. Because a well-mastered lossy mono track, there are DVDs with lossy mono that are better than Blu-rays with lossless mono because the lossless tracks have been scrubbed up too much. So there are some DVDs with a lossy track that's better than a lossless track because even though it's a smaller file size, the actual source hasn't been messed around with. So absolutely. Um, Oh, cool, Christopher. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I thought I was seeing things when I saw that pop up on the Hamilton Books website. That they're a really cool, like mom and pop style company, and they've been around forever, and they still do the mail order catalog. So when you buy something from them online, you'll actually get the book catalog in the mail like every month, and you get to flip through it, and it's a total nostalgia trip for me because it's just like when I was a kid, and those actually existed. So they're like the only one that still does a lot of mail order type stuff. Makes me think of the old. I would used to get the Movies Unlimited video order catalog and just flip through and look at all of these movies on VHS tape that I was just like dying to see, and I was like, wow. I have a magazine now I can look at of all the movies I'll never get to see because I can't afford this stuff, and no video store within like 1,000 miles has stuff like this. But I have a little tiny picture of it and a little blurb. It's like I would also like leaf through the giant Ebert review books or the Leonard Maltin review books, and I'd see like I would read about films before I could ever see them, so I'd always know that Howard Hawks directed Sergeant York with Gary Cooper, and it's great, and it's 4 stars because it's got 4 stars in the Leonard Maltin book, and I could see the VHS tape in the Movies Unlimited catalog, but I never got to see it until years later. But yeah, they get all kinds of stuff. Like they're also getting into Blu-ray pretty heavy. So they get titles from even like Shout Factory and the major labels, and they'll mark that stuff down. They do like monthly markdowns, so you can get some amazing stuff. And then they have like I think it's like a $4 or $5 flat rate shipping, no matter what your order size. So it was only like 4 bucks to ship this giant behemoth. So I was like, wow. And it was like they put it in a giant cardboard box, like it was double boxed and everything. And I was like, wow, I can't believe it. Somebody who took 5 minutes to ship it right, man. So yeah, they are awesome if you've never used them before. Let me catch up on some of these others really quick. Make sure I didn't miss anything. Oh, of course, everybody's asking about best westerns of all time. I mean, it's always kind of dodgy when you put that label on best of all time. This is the greatest thing ever because everything's subjective, or art itself is subjective, and there are people who hate Casablanca, and it's like I don't understand what's wrong with you, but that's their opinion. Um, so it's always a personal thing. You have certain ties to certain things, but if I had to do like 5 or 10, I mean it would definitely have Liberty Valance in there. Um, but this is just me going personally because historically important is also totally different because you have to have Stagecoach, you have to have the Searchers, and you have to have Rio Bravo, and you have to have a number of others, and you have to have silent westerns in there. But for me personally, it's probably Definitely Liberty Valance is in there, the Dollars trilogy, and I actually say all of Leone's westerns are that good. Everybody likes Once Upon a Time in the West, and everybody likes the Dollars trilogy, but I adore Duck You Sucker as well. I think that is a great film, even though it's still um, it's still missing a couple pieces. I think the reconstructed version, even though MGM kind of goofed it up some on the DVD and Blu-ray, I think it's a great film. So I have all five of Leone's westerns in my top 10, and then of course you have the Peckinpah masterpieces like of course the Wild Bunch and Ride the High Country. And Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid in the preview cut is just like one of the most gut wrenching pictures you can ever see because it's literally like a tone poem about death. um, and then you also got to have more Ford in there, like My Darling Clementine and Stagecoach. And the other stuff I would put in there, though, that I personally am huge on is, of course, the Anthony Mann westerns, particularly the five Stuart Mann westerns, and then the amazing Man of the West that he did with Gary Cooper after that is just fantastic. And all of them are groundbreaking, deeply psychological westerns that are very dark, very gritty and realistic, and all photographed in natural, beautiful vistas and locations and stuff. So while Ford is known for Monument Valley, there are actually very few um, Ford films of his whole career that are actually shot in Monument Valley. And I think people like Man kind of picked up on that and were like, you know what, we're going to take this out of the studio and actually just go to these different locales. So just the five Stuart Mann westerns alone, you start in black and white and then you transition to color. And Bend of the River, I think, was shot in Oregon, and then Naked Spur is a totally different terrain with this beautiful forestry in the middle of this grippingly dark drama. And then The Far Country is shot in Alaska and British Columbia, so you have that wilderness terrain, and then you have the snowy peaks, and it's cold, and it's a totally different thing, and it's all on location. And then Man from Laramie is more of the Arizona deserty type terrain, but again, all on location and with this beautiful outdoor vista in all five of them. And Man of the West is the same way. So Man is really underrated for using the terrain um, in ways that Ford did, but it was also different. So I put Man right up there as one of the great Western directors, definitely the most underrated. But yeah, for me, the best Westerns are anything done by Ford or Bodeker or Leone or Peckinpah or Anthony Mann or and then of course the Howard Hawks Westerns. And like you've got the big important ones. And then I love some of the westerns that Mike Curtiz did and Raul Walsh did, of course. So they're right in there. So you can just keep going and going and going. It's a never ending thing. But yeah, those would be like my personal top favorites, of just westerns. But again, I could just keep going because I there's so many westerns I still haven't seen, and so many westerns that are more obscure. And when I was a kid, the irony of all this is when I was a kid, I was like, well, westerns are kind of boring because they're all the same. It's just cowboys and just stuff happens. And I felt the same way about horror films. And I basically had to discover both genres for myself and realize, oh, they used to be about storytelling and they were more complicated. And in ways, they were more complex than standard storytelling because through the genre storytelling, you were able to go down darker paths, but because it was a horror film or because it was a Western and it was removed from this time period, you were able to talk about more things in indirect ways. And this is what happened with science fiction. And, of course, the not necessarily the 40s in terms of film, but really science fiction in the 50s and 60s, you were able to do the same thing and talk about deeper topics, but because it was under the context of science fiction, you could get away with a lot more. Just as the original Japanese version of Godzilla is essentially about the atomic bomb. It's not about a dinosaur at all. It's about the reactions and it's a stand-in for the dropping of the atomic bombs. It's not a monster movie technically. So that's just another example of the same thing. So I had to discover both genres for myself, and then it became an obsession. So uh, I think a child version of me would be very perplexed at how obsessed I get with westerns now. And just thinking about other things that just more titles keep popping to mind of great, important, amazing westerns. Vera Cruz is another great one. That one was very groundbreaking, very dark, very gritty. The first western to be shot entirely on location in Mexico in 1954. You look at that picture and you'd swear it's from the 1960s because of how dark and gritty and out there it is. And it even has Gary Cooper actually playing against type. He's a rougher character, he's a darker character, he's more all-knowing. And then basically Burt Lancaster plays a human form of Satan, if that's a thing. And when he cracks those grins with those blisteringly white teeth, and his skin is so like dirty and dark and everything, and he's dressed in all black. He's literally like just like the biggest smilingest devil you've ever seen in your life, and it's an amazing picture, and it's a huge influence on Leone and Peckinpah and everybody that came afterwards, and it fits in with even what Ford was doing before, but it's one of the few pictures that doesn't just sit there and borrow from Ford and not acknowledge it and not be its own original thing. um, so See. Look, Disney, you may destroy franchises, but you and everybody else can never take away our physical media. We will continue to celebrate the classics through physical discs. Yes. Until somehow they develop a way to break into our houses and take back our discs under some legal tomfoolery or something. So, yeah, until they get to whatever desperate point would make them do that because of their never-ending revisionism, yeah, it's like if we have physical copies, they can't just go away. Um, of course, of course, we have LD rot and DVD rot does happen, and stuff breaks down. And I don't know if we'll ever get to the point where trying to get a DVD or Blu-ray player repaired will be like getting a Laserdisc player repaired. I don't think we'll ever get to that point because things are cheap and plentiful in terms of getting replacements instead of repairs. But if they do try and kill off physical media, that might actually, happen at some point where it's like, you have to buy used Blu-ray players, and it's like trying to track down a working Laserdisc player, which is a scary thought. But if they do continue on this crusade like that of trying to say, streaming is here to stay, physical media is just ridiculous, and we can't do that, that's what you're going to eventually get to in terms of what's left. Let's see. What else do we have here? Uh, oh yeah, studios could put more effort in and do Warner size box sets more often in 4K. Yeah, I mean, Warner Brothers pretty much had I wouldn't say a monopoly, but they pretty much standardized the big old DVD box of a single subject, where it was just standard cases shoved in like this. It was the signature line first of all the actors and actresses of the classic period. Then they did the Hitchcock box, and you have them on the shelf, and you have all the nice pictures, and it's a nice big wide book size piece. And as you can see, they look pretty good. Here's the Over here you can see the various Errol Flynn ones, and then of course you can see over time they got smaller and smaller because I think somebody eventually realized that having all of these standard cases side by side, that's a bit bulky. So they switched to using the slim cases, which was a good idea. They probably should have done that in the first place. Um, but this was like the one time I've seen them actually go back. I think there's like maybe one or two others, but they went back and put in the full special box of a single film into the whole set. So I remember when I was looking to actually get this, I was very confused. I was like, why are some of them with extra films, and then some of them it's the same box? It took me forever to realize there's two different versions. Um, but yeah, let's see. Okay, going back to comments from some of the last shows. Sure. Okay, talking about one of the last shows, Pete was talking about who needs a new wave of filmmakers when you can have uh, a Pokemon and then a revamp of, I guess, the Little Mermaid or something. Um, no, no, I totally get what you mean. It's all about building franchise brands, and it's all. I think I've mentioned this several times, but the thing that bothers me most is how everybody talks about brands and content and generating content. It's not about telling stories. It's not about making pictures. It's not about making television shows or writing great stories or novels. It's generating content that can then be monetized and thrown out there on a streaming platform or Netflix or something, and it really devalues um, the reason for telling stories in the first place. It's not to just have material to sell because you need a corporate bottom line, but that's what everybody's doing. I hate that word so much. It is. Just everybody's like, oh, we have such great content. We need to produce more content. And I'm like, no, you actually need to have content in what you make, not just content, because that's just stuff. It's like, Netflix comes up with so much stuff and they want to make more and more stuff to have more stuff than anybody else. But if it has no content, which most of it does not, um, what's the point? You know? Um, so that's what really bothers me about the current mentality of everything is this whole notion of producing content over everything else. And then everybody wants to have their tentpole brand franchise because they know how to follow the marketing ploys and the code book basically written by what Marvel did and then Disney did with the Marvel brand. And of course, it doesn't always work, as Disney has found out with their continual bastardization of Star Wars. So it does not work in this magic way the same for everybody. But apparently, everybody thinks that they can just make everything work the same way. Let's see. Yeah, onto the good stuff instead of the torture nowadays. Yeah, cough, cough, Disney, cough, 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 cough. Um, yeah, I have a hard time even coming up with a point where I even because it's hard to even talk about Disney because I'm like, well, if I talk about Disney, I'm talking about the actual company as it once was, and I don't know where the line in the sand is in terms of what year, because I mean, I like some of the animated features after Walt died, and they were still doing you know decent productions and stuff, but it was on a dwindling scale, and the company was not what it once was, and everybody was always wondering how long they would last. So basically, I'm like Disney pre corporatization, pre Eisner and Katzenberg and everybody, but they turned it around and turned it into a different thing, and otherwise, in a lot of ways, I wish that hadn't happened. And if Disney had continued, it would have been a more natural thing. But that's we're just, that's all wishful thinking. Oh wow, sorry to keep you this long, Melinda. Yeah, I think I'm gonna be winding it down in a minute too. So yeah, definitely. If it's 1 a.m. where you are, yeah, I know on my end, like on some of the later ones, some of the last couple shows, it's been like super late for me too. So I totally get it. So yeah, definitely have a great one, Melinda. And yeah, everybody keep spinning discs. Absolutely. Um, I think I probably should hang up in a few minutes too. Find myself using old school terminology. I'm talking about classic films, and I'm talking about hanging up on a live stream. Wow. um, Let's see. What do you think is the best designed digibook? Ooh, that is a good one. Well, I have to say, as far as Blu-ray digibooks, I'm not. I mean, they're okay and they could be cool and stuff, but sometimes they're just kind of. I would be okay if just having a booklet, like it's. I grew to really love the old school DVD digipacks, and I was talking about Warner Brothers and. Trying to think if I have a good one for an example. I wish I kept some of them because I wound up donating some when I upgraded and things like that. But let's see if I've got one handy. Where did that go? Let's see. Here's a good one. Because this one, the art has been, it's slightly revamped from the last Laserdisc, but I just love. This is my favorite cover because I love the rendering. I think it's just perfect. But it's a great example of the Warner Digipack. This is the two-disc Doctor Zhivago, and again, it uses the original poster art, but I think this one just nails the usage of space on the jacket. And, you get the nicer, thicker looking spine that looks really cool on the shelf. And it's roughly DVD size, so it doesn't stick out. And all of these were really well printed with great color. And I wish they would go back to this style of packaging because I think it's the right mix of being fancy and being affordable. Um, and they were just simple, slip outs like this, and they would just replicate the art from the cover. But then you open it like so, and you can put your chapter listings spread out. This is Laserdisc esque in a way, and I still think this is the best packaging for Zhivago overall because even though it got the really awesome CAV Laserdisc box, this one is it's stylized and it's classy and it's simple, but it's also um, even though the Blu-ray is a digibook, which I'll show you in a second, I still prefer the way this is laid out. And you get this really nice overlay underneath the disc. Let me pop these out really fast so I can show you really quick, which is just gorgeous. So, like I said, I wish I'd kept a number of these. Like the Casablanca one that uses the original one sheet art. That one was great, and I I finally upgraded to Blu-ray, and then I upgraded to the 75th anniversary 4K remaster Blu-ray, which is amazing. But I still regret that I passed on my Digipack DVD to my sister because she didn't have a good copy, and I'm like, well, I would be a bad brother if I didn't make sure you had a great Casablanca copy, and yeah, but I still miss the packaging. But then going over to the digibook, which is also again is pretty good, and it's kind of a laminated cover and the title's embossed. But as you can see, it's a more modernized image. And this is one of the better digibooks because it's got a thicker book to it, but it just doesn't. I don't know. It's just never felt as substantial to me. Here's the, well, whoops, dropping stuff everywhere because they just added extra inserts into here instead of actually putting a holder for them. So here's the Blu-ray again with gorgeous imagery. So this is like the Digipack DVD. So this part is cool, but the actual reading the books inside of a digibook, I don't know about you guys, but it's always felt a kind of bit unwieldy to me. I'd much rather have just a separate booklet, yeah, just tucked in there because it's kind of hard to sit here and be like, oh yeah, cool, and then it opens like this, and you got to be like this. And most digibooks, it's a few essays, but it's not a whole lot of text. But this is one of the better ones. Like I said, it's a thicker digibook than usual, and you get some really awesome stills that are not commonly seen. But when you're already a giant movie nerd and you already know a lot about a favorite film, and you get a digibook and it has some little factoids and blurbs, and it's like, oh, okay, I know that. I've watched the documentary 5 times. I get it. It's cool. It's nice that they did that, but I'm like, I could use like this is great. So this I think is probably the best digibook that I have. Um, but for the most part, I'm actually not really big on them. Like here's the special features on the bonus DVD, and then the part that slipped out because I just tucked this in here. It's got a I don't know why they did a sampler, but it's a sampler of the soundtrack on CD, and it's just in a cardboard sleeve that's shoved into the digibook. But yeah, so at least they did that, but it's just shoved in here. And show you the rear. But yeah, this is the best one that I think I have, at least the best one I can think of off the top of my head. Um, but that being said, I mean, I like them. I definitely like them better than steel books because I've never been big on steel books because it's hard to get one that's not scratched up or dented, and then it's hard to get the discs out because of the clamps they use. And I just think steel books are kind of a gimmick, to be honest. But digibooks can be okay, but you have to do something different with them. Um, Actually, just found some more examples now that I think of it. Um, like here's the now out of print King Kong digibook, which is really cool and uses the amazing alternate 1933 art. And here's the other art on the back, so it looks great, and you get this really cool picture of the gate on Skull Island and everything, and then you get the nice booklet. But again, these are always so tight. I always feel like I'm gonna break the spine or something, trying to read them, and I'm like, um, but again, this is one of the better ones. So these are really cool when they work. Um, I'd forgotten about this one. This one I'll also bring up because this one is another one. I think this is out of print, and I think Warner Archive is actually going to redo this just for the disc. So this one is out of print now, but it's one of the better ones. This is the Warner Jazz Singer reissue, the 3 disc set. That's really really awesome, and one of the few times they've done Warner Brothers, the regular label, has done a full on um, archival Blu-ray release, and you get try and do this without get this really awesome background image and a really thick digibook piece on the importance of the film, of course. And as you can see, it's really, really thick. See if I can. All right. And then on the back, you have the 2 DVDs of supplements that replicate all the stuff from the previous DVDs. And the really cool part is it's actually structured like an old Vitaphone ad. So um, a few times. It's mostly Warner Brothers who really did some good digibooks. So there are a few out there, but it seems like everybody's kind of stopped. This is the best one I think Sony did, and I held on to this because even though you can get the 4K set and it has the Blu-ray in it, I mean, this is one of the best Blu-ray packages ever. This is the I mean, it's not exactly a digibook. It's like a more fold-out book package for Bridge on the River Kwai, but they very quickly switched over to just a standard Blu-ray case, and I love this. I love the art design. It feels great. It's all embossed, and these are super cheap nowadays. But you gotta um, specifically track down this box version. But I mean, the 4K is great. It's from the same master, but you don't get the full fold-out package and everything. So this, I take it back. This is a full digibook, but it's the thicker variety that like most, has a really iconic background image, but then has a uh, a nice selection with a full the back page here. I kept these sealed because I was trying to keep it together, but I should open it at some point. But this packet here includes some reproduction lobby cards. So this is also kind of harkening back to the heyday of DVD and, of course, Laserdisc box sets. So and of course, none of this comes on the 4K release, which again just goes back to the standard case. So I really love what they did with this. It doesn't take a lot, but it definitely again shows attention to care and detail and stuff. And the extra disc is a DVD version of the newer restoration, and this is the only way to get it on DVD. So it's at least important for that if you're still, DVD only and you want to see the restored version. Um, and it's simple and clean and fits right back on the shelf. Let's see, where did it go? Hope you guys like watching me shelve and reshelve. And then I know somebody else mentioned this, so I wanted to talk about it for a second. I think somebody mentioned Close Encounters. I'm gonna hang on to this forever because I love the packaging, and I think this had a similar fancy box when they did the DVD set with the different versions. But I still like this transfer, and it's still got better soundtracks than the 4K, because this has a 24-bit soundtrack, whereas the 4K and remastered Blu-ray only have a 16-bit soundtrack. And again, that's really minute technical nerdiness. But so anyway, here is the 2007 Close Encounters Digipack Digibook box, and really well done with the original teaser poster, and it's very glossy and everything. So I actually had the standalone Blu-ray at first, and then I was so determined to get this because this was out of print for a long while. You could only get the single disc. So I eventually sold that and finally tracked this down. And I'm glad I did because it's really well done. And for once, it's a separate book, which is so much easier to flip through. So it's basically having the digibook detached, and it's got the same sort of glossy printing on each page, but it's really, really amazing. So this definitely is cool to hang on to, even if you prefer the 4K version, because um, the 4K version, they had the fancier box, but all it did was have the light up strip with the aliens on the front of it, whereas this um, gives the same sort of shiny, modernized, glossy printing to iconic moments from the film. And then here's a picture of Roy on the inner flap, and it's a nice thing to kind of fold out and look at like that. And then I even like the disc art they chose for the labels. It's just really cool. Let me try to roll these around a little bit. I don't know about you guys, but every time I take a disc out, I always try to make sure to roll the label up so it's right side up. And then of course they roll out anyway, but it's just something you do. And then the really cool part is they included this fold out to actually give a description of the differences between the three versions of the film, so you can see where scenes are that you're looking for. This is one of the best additions to any special edition video release, because Close Encounters is very confusing. And so this is a really cool thing to have, especially with pictures and a timeline for each. And then the best part, of course, is the fact that on the flip side, they give you a poster reproduction of the original teaser. And this is on very, very glossy paper. So that's why it's very shiny. So it's really, really high end and really nice. So yeah, as far as favorite digibooks, that's where I am. I think some can be really good, but I would much rather just have like more extras on a disc, or just a separate booklet or something. But I am happy that at least sometimes they try to give a bit of special preferential treatments to something, instead of just, collectible steelbook edition, or like those Mill Creek retro VHS slip covers over a crappy transfer. And I'm like, can we just get a better transfer, um, but yeah, there are some. So for me, I'd say it's Zhivago's a nice thick digibook. King Kong is really cool, and of course the Kong is out of print, and the Jazz Singer and Bridge on the River Kwai are probably the best ones, and I forgot one. I totally forgot one, and I can't believe it, because it's good we're talking about Ford anyway, because I totally forgot to mention this. So this is a digibook. This is a quasi Ford film, because of course it is composed of multiple segments directed by different directors, one of which was done by Ford. So I totally blinked on this earlier, and I should have brought it up and mentioned it. But this is the digibook of How the West Was Won. And this one is super important because it's the only way to see the Smilebox Cinerama simulation version of this film. Um, Smileboxing, of course, is a process of using letterboxing in a sort of curved form on the top and a curved form on the bottom. Hence, the image looks like a weird smile. Hence, that's why it's called Smileboxing. And so they've done it a few times. And How the West Was Won is one of the two narrative features shot in full 3-panel Cinerama, consisting of three individual pieces of film pieced together. So the regular Blu-ray is the ultra wide, all three with no curvature, and I think like 2.89 to 1, which you can get. But the only way to get the Smilebox version is this digibook, which is out of print. So this is a really cool, really cool little package, and the artwork's pretty nice. But it's a digibook, but this is the reason why I want to pick this up is for the Smilebox presentation. And I know some people have some issues with it not being exactly perfect because it's a very difficult thing to do, and it's not been done very often, but it's amazing to at least see somebody trying to approximate what this would be like to see in full 3-panel Cinerama. So, um, as far as digibooks go, in terms of what you get in them, this is like the most important one because of that Smilebox version. Um, Other than that, it's just got the credits on the back, but as you can see, it's like very glossy. This is definitely printed like a book. So this is very much like a plastic cover, hardcover book you pick up at a bookstore. But this is one I would recommend simply to check out that Smilebox version because it's just rarely been done. So that's definitely in there as well. And I should have mentioned that before because one of the segments was directed by Ford. It's a hard film to sit through because it's so long, so it's cool to see it in the ultra wide version or in that smile box presentation. It makes it a little bit easier because it's more interesting to sit through the entirety of how the West was won. Because it's basically like, 4 or 5 individual movies just kind of cobbled together and everything is so wide. So it's an oddball of a movie, but it's got great things in it. So it's really cool to see a cleaned up version, but I know some people didn't had some issues with the soundtrack remix, and they really could spruce it up a bit, and it could be even better. But to date, it's amazing to see the digibook with the Smilebox version. So yeah, that's me in digibooks. So little long winded, but Uh, Warner, I think, has kind of scaled back on the digibooks though, but they were like the biggest like backers of digibooks. It seemed. I think everybody's happy with 4K because you can just do a single case, which I get it. If that's what we have to do, that's cool. I'm fine with that. I'm like, let's just make sure the discs are great and make sure it has a decent picture on the front. And okay, it'd be nice to have a fancy package, but I'm really concerned with what's on the disc. Yeah. Most steelbooks are great. Only huge problem is they frequently have ugly cover art instead of original poster art. Yeah. And like especially when you see those exclusive steelbooks and it's like that looks horrible. And you have people who like obsessively collect all steelbooks worldwide, like German exclusive steelbooks and stuff. I'm like, wow. Um, good for you, but isn't it the same disc inside? It's the same disc worldwide. Like, okay. I guess it's cool. I don't know. Um, oh yeah, I didn't get I wound up getting the Hustler after they'd switched to just the standard case. So yeah, I don't have the cool booklet, and yeah, I figured it probably opened up to show the pool table. So yeah, I mean, if there's a digibook out there, I try to get it instead of the standard case version, but sometimes you just wind up only being able to get the standard case version because they've already phased it out. So oh, Deck cut the limited European Steelbook of Army of Darkness just to have all 3 in Steelbook, but, it feels way cheaper than the 2 US ones, yeah, and it costs way more, yeah. Let's see. Anybody know of Plan 9 from Outer Space on Laserdisc? I think it was, because I know they did the box set of Ed Wood on DVD, and I think that started on Laserdisc, so I'm pretty sure somebody did Plan 9 on Laserdisc, probably Image or somebody. Hmm, I should look it up. I'm now curious myself. Hmm, pardon me while I boot up the Laserdisc database really quick just because 'cause I'm curious. I swear somebody had to do it. Yep, there's actually 2, and it looks like the first one is Yep, both are for Image. Image did one in the '80s that was analog only, and then they did a Ed Wood double feature with digital sound. So it's Plan 9 backed with Night of Ghouls and Jailbait, but it's a DADC pressing, so it doesn't have a rot report, but yeah, apparently it's going for about 15 bucks, but of course it's DADC, so you will have to check it. But yeah, I'm glad I looked that up because I was like, It has to be on Laserdisc somewhere." So yeah, it's got two releases from Image. So you can totally have your Plan 9 Ed Wood party on Laserdisc if you want to. Yeah. What distributor thought they would have made bank on that film? Well, whoever signed Ed Wood and thought it was a good idea and didn't research what they were getting into and didn't ask to read any script treatments and didn't go on the set and wonder what was going on. But if you sold it just right, you could have made decent money on the drive-in circuit. I mean, Roger Corman made his entire career out of doing that, except he was making good stuff in the middle of making stuff for the market. So um, there are ways. You can sell a movie and hope people don't get so mad that they try to get their money back. uh, yeah, the 4K of Close Encounters is great. I have it. So I just have it's the standard case. Some had a slip cover, and then they made the box that just had this in it, and it just had a light up strip of the aliens on the front. But yeah, I mean the new scan is amazing, but I just don't like some of the color tweaks that are in here because they smell very suspiciously like the stuff I hate on Raiders of the Lost Ark on Blu-ray. So I'm kind of always like, I mean, this is really great, but I kinda like the 2007 version better in terms of color a little bit, and, the 4K disc is better than the 1080p remastered disc as they usually are, so and the 2007 version has slightly better audio, so if I rewatch it, I'm probably just gonna put in the 2007 disc, so, um, but yeah, talking about simplicity of packaging, this just has the 2 Blu-rays and then the 4K disc put in here. So, I mean, I like the simplicity of 4K cases, and this does have nice rear art and everything. So, if this is how it has to be, I'm okay with this for now. But of course, this is Sony we're talking about, and not, other studios. So, um, and yeah, the original poster included is amazing on the first set, and so is the trailer, especially that teaser where it's just like you were literally just getting bare minimum, but you were totally like, "Man, what the heck is that?" Um, I mean, the button on the 4K box is cool, don't get me wrong, but those batteries go super fast. Like there were a couple DVDs where it's cool, it's a novelty, but then you accidentally set it off like 50 times. Every time you take it off the shelf, okay. Every time you set it down, okay. Every time you put it back on the shelf, okay. And then eventually the battery goes out, and it's like, well, I don't want to tear open the cardboard and ruin the box. So, well, that's just dead now. Hopefully the battery doesn't explode or leak or something. But um, 4K enhancements. Yeah, I remember reading something about that. People were posting screen captures of the mothership sequence at the end, and some were saying that there was some lighting changes going on, and the effects look slightly different. But I don't know if that's um, being able to better realize what was originally there, or if it's kind of what I was kind of not happy with, because it seemed like there were a couple spots where there was some teal color here and there, with some other things that were in some orange skin tones. Again, very much like the Raiders remaster that I'd hate. Um, but again, it's not like we can go see an original theatrical print from the '77 version or even a special edition 1980 print. They just don't get shown, and it's not like we have a proper reference to say, "Hey, okay, so this is what it really, 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 really looked like." We just all have to make educated guesses. And because that's what we're doing, most people just are like, "Oh, well, you're some armchair internet critic, and what the heck do you know?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm saying I don't really know. I'm just saying it just doesn't feel quite right." But it's not like I can go out and look at a proper reference because we don't have access to that. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think the 4K is largely excellent, but there are a couple things that kind of bother me, and it's all pretty much the color timing. Pete, I think if you dig through the thread on Blu-ray.com, I think that's where people posted a bunch of screen captures and TV photos and stuff. And that's where because I didn't read into a lot of it. I was just there were a couple just regular non-special effects scenes where the color I was kind of like, man, this seems a little weird. But that's because I'd gone through Raiders and so I was kind of like, well, that kind of looks like Raiders. I'm like, oh crap. Um, but yeah, if you just go on Blu-ray.com and kind of dig through it, I think it's a really massive thread on the 4K Close Encounters. I think that's where you can find most of the people talking about stuff like that. But yeah, that's again, I don't really know. It's not like we can go out and look at a proper reference print. Um, so, um, uh, oh, talk about the view from above mode. Yeah, those are pretty interesting. Those interactive watch with the movie forums and stuff. Um, so yeah, I think that's gonna probably do it for tonight as well. I think I got through everything and probably uh, said Ford so many times that I've driven you guys crazy. Um, so definitely thanks for hanging out with me and letting me prattle on about Ford, and hopefully this will spur people on into digging deeper into the grand depths of the and find great hidden gems in Ford's career, or find titles you just hadn't seen before, or it's been a long time and revisit them. And definitely check out some of the. He's definitely best represented on DVD, and it's pretty easy to see most of his films on DVD. There's not you don't have to do a lot with out of print titles and stuff, but it's primarily the silent films that are just unavailable because they're simply lost. But there is a good number that are available now. But the big one would be, seeing the Iron Horse, which is on the remastered DVD. But again, the Ford at Fox box set is a must. It is film school in a box. So, and since they're being blown out, cannot recommend it highly enough. Just be sure and get one and check all your discs. So, let's see. Okay, still talking about Close Encounters. Yeah. Yeah, definitely check out the Blu-ray.com thread on that. It's pretty massive. I think it's like 200 pages or something. Let's see. Underrated Bond film next stream. Ooh, yeah. I mean, I could do that, or I could, I could do that, and it would be like 22 hours, and then I wouldn't know which one to do because I think pretty much all of the original series are underrated, both critically and publicly. Yeah, definitely could do that at some point. Actually, that does bring up something. There were I know Sam Hatch Culture Dog does and also Daisuke does as well. Does a sort of film club for the live stream. So I didn't want to say any specific titles and then talk about them a bunch in case people have never seen them. So I wanted to, if I ever did specific titles, I wanted to mention them first so everybody could have time to get a copy and see it and stuff. So there were a couple interesting films I've seen kind of recently, kind of rewatched and stuff. So I didn't know if they'd be too niche or something, but I wanted to throw them out there. So, if anybody has ever seen or is interested in talking about McKenna's Gold, it's a really out there Western that I finally got to rewatch. But I didn't, again, I don't want to throw out some of these titles if people have never seen them and then like totally spoil them. Um, and then I rewatched for the first time in a long time two pictures Neil Jordan did. They're like his most famous Mona Lisa and The Crying Game, which are really stylistically very similar in a lot of ways, and are, very important, very good films from the sort of lower budget UK productions, late 80s, early 90s. Um, so that's some of the topics I'm kind of thinking about throwing out there. But if I ever do individual titles, I'll definitely try and mention them at the end of a show so everybody can have time to sort of rewatch them before I spoil them horribly for people if they've never seen it. So I'm always very hesitant to talk about plot about something because I don't want to spoil a movie, even if it's from the 40s or something, because I'd feel horrible if somebody had never seen it. So um, those are some of the ideas I've been kind of tossing around. But yeah, definitely could absolutely do an underrated Bond film. But again, I'd have trouble picking one because I think they're all underrated. So let's see. Uh, how much do used copies of the CAV versions of Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin go for? Those usually aren't bad because they're not full on box sets. Rather, thanks for dropping in too. Just noticed you popped in here. Um, yeah, it's because the CAV Beauty and the Beast, it's just a regular jacket. It's one of those with the little yellow corner. You have to get the one that says CAV on it. So that one's shouldn't set you back more than $5 or so, unless you're like buying a specific Disney listing on eBay or something. So yeah, that one you can usually get for like $5 or so, and because it's the same as the regular one, just in CAV. The work in progress one has this special 2 disc one that you usually have to pay more for, but that's the one that can get rotted. So you got to sometimes go through a couple. Aladdin has that really amazing cover with the outline of the genie. It's one of my favorite Laserdisc jackets ever. It's amazing, but it's just a regular gatefold. So that one also, that shouldn't set you back more than $10 or so. I wouldn't think. I didn't pay much for either of those. Those are two of the easy ways to get Disney CAV titles, and it's not expensive like one of the box sets. So, and both are great Laserdisc transfers. They're and have great Dolby surround tracks. So yeah, highly recommended. I love that Aladdin jacket. I'm not the biggest fan of the more modern Disney titles, but that jacket is gorgeous. Um, so yeah, those are easy CAV gets for Disney. Oh, came across used copies. Okay. Yeah. Seller wants you to make him an offer. Yeah. Basically, hopefully they understand laser discs are not ostensibly rare, and it's not like they have a whole lot of value. And um, Disney titles are usually a little bit more than regular ones, but it's not like the whole Black Diamond VHS thing that happened where it's like the $6,000 VHS tape of Little Mermaid on eBay and that stuff. But yeah, if you're looking at both of them, like maybe 15 for both, something like that, as like a starting point. Like I said, both of them are more common and they're not rare, but you should pay a little bit more to get the CAV version, but not like a whole huge lot or something. But yeah, 15 or $20 tops probably should be fine, I would think. Um, Dex still sticking with the 2007 Close Encounters. Yeah, it's an amazing. It's like the best Blu-ray of 2007. It's amazing for an early Blu-ray. Yeah, so I mean, you really can't go wrong with any of them. But yeah, if you really want to get in the nitty gritty, I think the 4K of Close Encounters is very, very, very slightly problematic. It's just like gotta have that little bit of questionable stuff just to keep us hanging on to older discs for a little while longer and stuff. But yeah, so I will definitely take into consideration some of these ideas and stuff, and post on my channel for next week's show. I was trying to come up with a different topic. Um, I try to do a few things that usually aren't covered as much. That's why I was happy to do Ford, because it's so important. And I could easily do a long show on Hitchcock as well, but at least Hitchcock is talked about more, whereas Ford has been, you can't bring up Ford practically anywhere, which is just scary. So, um, but yeah, hopefully, thanks for hanging out and talking John Ford, and hopefully this spurs everybody to go out and dig deeper into the Ford canon, which is always a great idea. So hopefully you, like I said before, hopefully you revisit old favorites and find new favorites. Uh, so until then, thanks for hanging out, everybody, and keep spinning physical media. And everybody have a better one.